All right. What is happening, everybody? Sorry, I'm a little bit behind. But anyways, want to welcome everybody to our first ever call-in live stream. So for those joining after the fact, what I'm going to be doing today, I've seen a lot of other people do this on their channels. I wanted to give it a shot and see how it goes. But I want to basically, in a couple minutes here, I'm going to put out a link to open up anybody who's interested or who would like to join me actually here on the stream itself to ask any questions people may have that are good faith questions pertaining to Anglicanism or theology more broadly. And I'm happy to have a dialogue. Now, I know, sometimes they can get cantankerous, but this is not going to be that way. So anyways, I'm looking forward to this and I'm excited for kind of where some of these discussions may end up going. So yeah, everybody, welcome to the stream for today. I do want to say just a quick housekeeping thing. I know YouTubers say this stuff all the time, but I would also push this. If you find yourself liking this type of content, do keep in mind that a like even to this video can really help push this forward. Or if you comment in the actual comment section, that can help with the algorithm with pushing this video forward. And then if you're not subscribed, I'd get a plug for that as well. But yeah, guys. So anyways, I'm going to be putting out a link here in just a second. I'm going to ask for some grace with doing this, by the way. I've never actually done a full out live stream like this before. Hey, Zach, how you doing, brother? I'm actually going to put it on here in just a second. So right now I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to drop a link here in the live chat that, here we go, that basically people can join me at. And so the way it'll work, hey, Jim, how you doing, brother? How's it going, boss? So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this here in the comment section and in the live chat. And then I'll post it a couple times, as it gets later on in the stream, I'll repost it so that people don't have to go back to the very top. But if you click on this, it should bring you to the back room of this particular live stream. And then what I'll do is one by one, I'll bring people forward. Depending on, yeah, that'd be great, Quay. I'd love to have you hop on, brother. But yeah, it depends on how many people are in the chat, how long I can go with each person. But I'd really love to be able to do this. So, okay, so I'm going to send this out here now, guys. Okay, sweet. So if you click that link, StreamYard's pretty simple. It should bring you up and then we can move forward from there. But yeah, so I'm going to take these one at a time and just kind of see how this goes. Yeah. So anyways, I'm pretty excited for this actually, guys. Long story made short, while I'm waiting for somebody to, for anybody to join in. When I was a couple of years ago, I was actually a theology teacher at a non-denominational kind of Baptist leaning school. And oh, you've been up a long time. I hear you, brother. God bless you, man. But I used to be a theology teacher at a non-denominational Baptist type school. And I would do this kind of thing where I would just do open questions for the kids. You can imagine me, sacramental teacher, opening it up. But we had some really good discussions. So I kind of envisioned this going like that a little bit. Oh, man. Oh, right on, brother. And Josh, by the way, I don't care if I've done that. Well, I do want you to stay safe. But people, you can also just turn off your video and just do audio or whatever if you're out walking or something. It doesn't have to be high quality video. But do be safe for sure. Oh man. Oh, are you talking about when I said I was teaching at a non-denom school? Yeah. No, they're great. They're great. I learned many things from them, but it's also it's an interesting experience. So, all right, guys. So I'm just waiting. If anybody has any trouble with the oh, cool. What's up, man? Is this Father Brandon's parish, by the way? This Theology on Tap in California? It'd be fascinating. That'd be really cool. So let me know. I'd be interested in the comments just real quick. And then Zach, I see you here, brother. I'm going to bring you up here in just a second. But Zach's regular commenter and somebody who engages a lot. I'm excited to get to dialogue with you here, Zach. But I actually met Father Brandon randomly on a vacation I took with my family. I went to a parish in Tulsa and he was just there. And I was like, I know this guy. So anyways, it's pretty wild. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and bring Zach up to the stage. Zach, can you hear me, brother?
Yes.
All right. How you doing tonight, my man?
I'm doing good.
All right. Well, hey, it's nice to finally chat with you, man. I know I only sometimes get back to my comments. I would ask for some grace with that. I actually have 5 kiddos and my wife's been out of town. I've had quite a busy schedule, but I'm excited for this and for us to be able to dialogue, man. So So yeah, so feel free to go ahead and ask whatever you'd like to, bro, and then we can either do a dialogue or a back and forth, however you'd like to, or if you'd just like to share some reflections for me to respond to. But yeah, feel free to go ahead and ask whatever's God's putting on your heart, man.
All right. Okay, so one thing I have noticed is a lot of low church Anglicans today tend to reject like the perpetual virginity
Mhm.
when if you read even our low church divines, that was just like an assumed idea.
Mhm.
What do you think would be the best way to get them to embrace a doctrine that seemed so obvious to their low church ancestors?
Yeah, that's a tough. It's tough, man. So, um, like many people who moved into Anglicanism, N.T. Wright is like a real hero of mine, and he still remains that way. And he's somebody that doesn't hold the perpetual virginity. So it's tough for me because there's people that I really respect who don't hold it. But I would agree with you, like even people like Wesley, other reformers who are not English, it was just a given. I don't know any other way than to try and bring people back to the breadth of Catholicism and how we discern the Vincentian canon. So I guess from my angle, it would be trying to draw people back into having a mind to discern the full breadth of the Catholic tradition. So, like one example I'd give, man, and I know, like, are you in the ACNA, Zach? By the way, I don't.
No, I'm in the Anglican province of Christ the King.
Oh, cool. Okay, I've actually been to one of the churches that you guys have in Tulsa. Um, Anyways, it used to be the cathedral back in the day, but that's fascinating. So, I guess what I would say to that, so that's something that I would say the continuum in general has that kind of impetus, trying to, and correct me if you see it differently, but kind of this impetus to reground Anglicanism as a truly Catholic tradition, right? And where our mind is to draw from the great consensus. The reason I asked about the ACNA is so, like, in the 7 principles of the ACNA, it will talk about how, like, we hold the first 4 councils, but then it also says we hold the substance, the Christological clarifications is the language it uses, of the 5th, 6th, and 7th ecumenical councils. But then it adds a quip afterwards that says, insofar as they are agreeable to Scripture. Now, what's hard for me is obviously that leaves a wide breadth of how it can be interpreted. But I think of, like, for example, this might seem out of left field, but to me, it's an example where I think your question kind of comes together. If people were to ask me if I'm a diophilite or a monophyllite, I would unequivocally say immediately I'm a diophilite. And if they ask me why, it wouldn't be because I had that I've thought through all of the scriptural reflections as to why diophilitism was the teaching of the 6th ecumenical council, but I would just say I'm a son of the Church Catholic, so I submit to the will and the consensus of the Church and the Vincentian canon. Christ is a diophilite, right? You know what I mean?
Okay,
Like,
so
and so,
let's push that logic a little bit.
yeah.
So you're a son of the church, right?
Mhm.
So are Presbyterians going to hell for not bowing to images?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's
No.
not really mine to say that, but that would not be my
The church
general.
declares anathema those who call the images or idols. Declares anathema those who would say that veneration of icons is against the second commandment.
Mhm.
And it even defines for us neatly what anathema is: being cut off from the church,
Mhm.
being outside of the ark of salvation. So, if we are faithful sons of the church, and I also say I'm a faithful son of the church,
Mhm.
but if we are faithful sons of the church, then that logic should push us to say, if we affirm the entirety of the Seventh Council, that Presbyterians, Baptists, some Anglicans are going to hell. Now, I don't believe that, but
Mhm.
that is kind of where that logic leads, which is why I left that idea.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what I would say, man, and this gets into so, and I know, Zach, I know that we've kind of shared some epistemological reflections back and forth in the comments. In my mind, and I'm really not trying to dodge the question, to me, it comes down to an initial epistemology that we hold via which how we discern ancient things. And so, I'm trying to give some like examples that I think might connect with people. And if I'm going too far, if I'm going too far away from your question, feel free to rein me in here. But like, in general, I would say, so I got my undergrad in history. And so history and the way that we parse history and the way we work through history has always been really, really interesting to me. And what's fascinating, as somebody who like in college did an internship at a museum in the South and did some like reflections on Southern people in the Civil War, in the era of the Civil War, I found what's so interesting is I have to be really, really careful to not reflect my 21st century reflections and values back on people in a different time that thought in a very different way. And it's very, very easy for me to do so. Now, obviously, if that's going to be tough for us to do 150 years ago, it's going to be really tough for us to do what Nicaea 2s and 7 in the 8th century. It's going to be tough for us to do 12, 1300 years ago, right? And so in my mind, I look at how the East and the West have received Nicaea 2, for example, in very different ways. And both would say they're being faithful to the teachings of Nicaea 2. I would just say, from my general reflection on this, and to do like a real deep dive on Nicaea 2, I'd have to put a lot of effort into going into the canons, excuse me, bro, in specific. But just like a quick reflection would be that I do think that there's a general heartbeat of Nicaea 2 that can be drawn out. And I would say that heartbeat is basically that God can use matter or images to reflect like it's a continuation of the incarnation in a sense, or it's a not a continuation, it's like a downstream reality that comes from the incarnation.
Okay,
And
so we would agree then.
I would say that we would agree that the general impetus is that God can use matter towards this, but I don't think that means we ipso facto have to transfer that to condemning more modern groups such as Presbyterianism that moved away from icons for different historical reasons centuries later. So I think Presbyterians are wrong about what they say. I guess just like I think, and this might be a place where we see this differently, bro. I think that Rome can take something like Unum Sanctum and then take something like the decrees from on Vatican II and Unitatis Redintegratio. And I think that there's a core that can be drawn out that might peel back layers that were on top of that Unum Sanctum put on top of a core reality, which is salvation comes through Christ and through his body, the church. I think there were layers added in something like Unum Sanctum or the Council of Florence, but I think those layers can be peeled back and the core can still be reflected in something like Vatican II. I think something similar can happen with like icon veneration and then the things that are attached on it at Nicaea 2.
I mean, with all that complexity, though, you might as well just admit that Florence and Unum Sanctum were wrong. Like, because that's pretty much what you're doing by dodging
Mm.
what the writers meant. Because we shouldn't read documents in the way that, in a way that makes them sound good just because we want them to.
Hmm.
We should read them with the intent that the authors wrote them in. That's the honest way to read a document.
So I know I brought this up to you in the comments, bro. Is the APCK in full communion with the REC?
REC, unfortunately, no, not anymore.
Okay.
Because bishops.
Okay, because all that jazz, yeah. And I do believe they are in full communion with, it's either the ACC or the APA or both.
They're in full communion with ACC.
Okay.
For now.
Okay.
And they're also in communion with UECNA.
Okay.
So
okay.
That's kind of funny for where we are.
I get it, man. Anglicanism's a mess. But there's beautiful things, obviously, we cherish about our tradition, though, too. So I know that I believe I brought this up to you in the comments there. So, but even if, so for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I believe you do, Zach, that even if we want to push back on the REC, so I'm thinking back here to the Declaration of the Principles. What is it? The Declaration of Principles? I think is what it's called.
Yes,
from 1873, like right, where they break off from the Episcopal Church because of the Oxford movement, and in their Declaration of Principles, they basically reject baptismal regeneration, substantial presence in the sacrament. They reject like an ontological change in the priesthood. Like also they reject the jure divino reality of the episcopacy. Like all these like things that most Anglicans would say are very serious today. And yet recently, Bishop Ray Sutton puts out a document where he's basically doing a similar methodology, although I think it's even to a greater degree than what's required from like the RCC, where he is where he's reflecting on on these past things, and he's basically reinterpreting them, doing something similar to what I'm saying, where he's saying, well, like he's saying there's a core to these that we can draw out in the modern world, but the layers we're going to peel back. And so, like, one place that comes out is, I believe it's even at the REC Cathedral in Dallas that they actually held the recent Forward in Faith North America Summit. And to be a member of Forward in Faith in North America, you're required to believe in the objective presence of Christ in the sacrament.
What do
So
you
my
mean by
point is, they've
objective
done.
as well? Oh,
What'd you
well,
say,
we'll
brother?
get into that. I was asking what you mean by objective, but we'll get it. We can get into that later.
Yeah. That there's a substantial change in the core. That's the language they use, is substance. So what it most really is in its core on an ontological level, that it is actual new creation and it's not old creation anymore. That's what I would say. But
Okay.
anyways, but they hold that in Forward in Faith North America, and yet the people in Forward in Faith North America are also in the REC, and so they've done this. So even if we think that they should have turned and repented or whatnot, most Anglicans are not going to like boot out the REC or like make them repent prior to of the Declaration of Principles prior to any sort of communion. So I guess my point is, regardless, there's going to be different approaches to how Rome could approach some of their older documentation. I would hold the line that more there's a way to synchronize them and move forward with consonants. Some others would say, no, they need to push back on these things. But either way, there's a more core fundamental reality that if communion is possible, we do that with groups like the REC. Why not also allow that for Rome? And then maybe some of these other things we have to work out over hundreds of years.
Well, the difference between the REC and Rome is that the REC does not claim to be the infallible church. Rome makes the objective truth claim that they have always been infallible and do not make mistakes as the church.
I guess so. Well, I want to be careful who I was talking with a Roman Catholic earlier today. I would say that the claim of infallibility, though, is oftentimes more complicated than I think we realize. So just like one quick example that I brought up earlier today to my friend, I would say that many popes coming from the time of 1896 onwards, so that's when Apostolicae Curiae is promulgated, I'd say many popes from that era would have said that that was an infallible decree. And I know a lot of Anglicans argue that they think it's an infallible decree. But Rome today explicitly says in official documents that it's not an infallible decree. So Pope Francis said that in an officially promulgated document from the Vatican that has actual like magisterial weight. And that's also been promulgated by the USCCB, the United States Council of Catholic Bishops, from the year 1990. That's not the way they view it. And so my point is, oftentimes what's deemed to be infallible in Rome is actually, there's some ambiguity and it gets cleared up later on in time. And that's where figures like John Henry Newman or St. John Henry Newman, his methodology being inculcated into the Roman mind in the modern world has made a difference in how they reflect on past things. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off stream, but that's how I would kind of start with an epistemology to reflect on that.
Interesting. Because so I'm a computer science major, so
Mm-hmm.
I of course view things in like just logical ways.
Mm-hmm.
So like if code is wrong, it's not like I can nuance the code. I have to fix it. I have to admit that the code was wrong and I have to scrap it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I come from when I think about the church and it being connected to Christ, because Christ is the logos that undergirds everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a matter of, oh well, one's right, or it's not a matter of, oh well, one's right about like this thing and the other's wrong, but we can just smash the two together and hope it works.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it should be more of, okay, well, we see bugs in this code and we see bugs in that code. Well, I should say the church see bugs in this church, bugs in that church. We need to debug those together
Mm-hmm.
instead of, because I will admit there are some issues in the Anglican Reformation
Mm-hmm.
um, initially, namely, for example, um, us getting rid of the entirety of uh, devotion to the Blessed Mother,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the abuses of the Rosary and other things like that. And just like Rome, they of course had the abuses where they condemned sola scriptura and declared any anathema who were like Protestant. Um, so I think both sides definitely have stuff to admit they're wrong about,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think just trying to synchronize it will work very well.
Mm-hmm. So here would be I think how I think, Zach, is I try to think in like microcosm examples, because really, again, like the initial comment I made, I think stands true, brother, is I think kind of the first question that has to be answered when we wrestle with these things, and I see this online like all the time, is in some ways our starting epistemology that we begin with and what is possible and what is not is ultimately going to be something which carries us down a long road. So like the analogy I like to give is like if I'm going on a long journey from like Los Angeles to New York City, if I start off like 1 degree in a different angle from somebody else, I'm going to obviously end up on a very different place in the East Coast. How I see this with these kind of questions are like, if somebody comes to the question, and this is why I bring this up all the time, and this is not to denigrate, I actually think that I obviously believe that one epistemology is a more clear way. But I still think that, for example, like systematic theology and contextual theology or historical theology, I think they can learn from one another. But I do believe that those different epistemologies will lead us to different conclusions. Because, so in a sense, for example, I think that what you're saying is actually largely correct. That the way that we're going to work through it is not going to be by smashing things together, but by like really careful working through, excuse me, older dialogues. And I would say looking to eschatology and kind of using both to very carefully work through complicated things. So when I had my dialogue with Brett Salkeld a couple weeks ago, about a little, I don't remember exactly how long ago, but one thing we
about
talked
a
about,
month ago.
yeah. One thing he said is when the ARCIC team came to the agreements that they did, it was by no means the lowest common denominator, and it was by no means compromise from either side. And from his reflection, he said the reason it took Rome 20 years to kind of affirm it, and the reason it took Anglicanism a long time to affirm it, was because of caution that it would not be received, and they didn't want it to be viewed as compromise. They wanted to really show that they had actually come to doctrinal convergence with really careful reflection.
Well, I
And they
mean,
wanted
we
something.
left Anglicanism before anything like that was done. So for us, that's not really like the whole
So
thing about, oh, well, the Anglican Church received it. We see the Anglican Church as having invalidated itself before then, like in terms of women's ordination.
Mhm. So one of the people I'm going to have on, and I know this is a different, obviously, province, but one of the people I'm going to have a video with really soon is Bishop Chandler Holder Jones, who, and I don't say this to just like puff up, but he's actually been very, very complimentary of my methodology and kind of how I've gone about things.
Oh, he's an APA guy, right?
Yeah, he's the presiding bishop of the APA. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. They've become a lot more like the ACC recently.
Mm-hmm. And you'll have to forgive me. I don't understand all of the nuances between the different continuum provinces, but
I
one
don't
thing.
quite, but from what I know, it seems like the ACC, the APA, and the APCK even tried to do this with my priest. They view orders from other places, like anybody ordained by the ACNA, ACC will do a reordination
Mm.
because they split later. When my priest actually was going to be ordained in the APCK, they said, we'll not ordain. They were going to make him a rector. And they said, will you go through a reordination? Because we're not certain about your ordination. Well, my priest showed them that they were being ridiculous because the bishop who ordained that bishop's bishop was the one who ordained my priest as a priest. So
Mm.
if he said that my priest wasn't validly ordered, he'd have to say he wasn't validly ordered.
Yeah.
But that tends to be a big issue among continuing groups is that they're like, oh, well, we don't know whose orders are valid and this and that and the other. It's all just the bishops being, well, not good bishops.
Wow. God's peace to man. It's tough, bro. And I want to be careful to speak on that, which I know not, when it comes to the continuum, because that's not kind of the world I function in general. But I just know I'm praying for our brethren there, and all this would be sorted out in God's will. I think so, but just so to bring up the point with Chandler Holder Jones. So when he goes on the Sacramentalist podcast, and I believe they're in the APA and ACC. They spend a lot of time quoting Archic. They talk about it as their own. I know that one of the Sacramentalist podcasts actually had somebody from the Archic team actually on their channel to talk about it. So this line of the ACC or the AP or like the continuum in general, I don't know about the APCK specifically, but in general, that line about them not accepting the dialogues of Archic, I find to be like when I hear Bishop Chandler Holder Jones and Father Wesley and the other guys from the Sacramentalists talk about it, they certainly speak about it in the same way I would, as something that is truly binding. And then I know, like, another example, if people follow him on Twitter, the rector, I realize this is in the ACNA, but it's in the Diocese of Fort Worth, the rector at St. Timothy's um, um, just recently reached out to me and put out on Twitter, like, the Archic beliefs are the beliefs of the Anglican Church. So it's not like a niche thing that I'm just putting out there randomly, or that's just like from the liberal side of Anglicanism. I just want to say, I guess, that it is something that's a widely held belief, that these really did hold a sense of real consonance and is a very serious dialogue. Like, would you and Zach, I'll give you back the floor then, brother, to ask any final things you may want to ask. I see I have another brother here in the chat. They'll hop on soon. And by the way, I'm going to do these more often. So my hope is that we can dialogue more. And Zach, if you wanted to do further dialogue, like off of YouTube, I'm happy to do that as well, brother, to shoot my email, whatever. We can chop it up however.
Sounds good.
But I guess I just also wanted to say, what was I going to say? Oh, like, my quick question for you, and then I'll give you the last kind of reflection and word, or any final question you may want to ask on this live stream. Would you view figures like Henry Chadwick, who's usually lauded as like one of the best Anglican figures, very Anglo-Catholic, very serious, right? Would you laud him as like a hero in your mind of Anglicanism? Or how would you view people coming out of the Church of England from that time period, from the mid 20th century?
Henry Chadwick, let's see. Because I'm not really big into Anglo-Catholicism. I would
Okay.
describe myself as a very old high church
Okay.
or conservative Anglo-Catholic, more closely aligned with like the original Tractarians, like before the ritualist movement, even though I do like some of the stuff from the ritualist movement.
Yeah.
But in terms of theology, like, so Henry Chadwick, is he the one who did he made the Oxford translation of Augustine's Confessions, if I'm not mistaken?
That's a
Is
little
that
beyond me. I'm not sure. Him and his brother Owen were two of the like most lauded historians coming out of the mid 20th century in England. I believe Henry Chadwick, I think he was the dean at Christ Church Cathedral in Oxford.
okay, yeah, he was the guy who wrote it then, or
Okay.
translated it.
Okay.
Yeah, I like a lot of his scholarly work.
Mhm.
I haven't read much of his history.
Mhm.
My biggest thing with Archic is that it seems like, I mean, we're trying to find some common ground, but traditionally, Anglicanism wouldn't really use transubstantiation. We would leave it a mystery,
Hmm.
um, from what I've read.
Hmm.
And the Archic document, because I've read a good bit of it, it seems like it uses, well, no, it does have that footnote about what they mean by transubstantiation. I
Mhm.
guess to me, it just feels like we're just giving up on it.
Hmm. See, and well, and I'll just give a quick little reflection. I'll let you have the last word, brother, because this is something that, you know what I mean? We could do like a whole stream just on this, Zach. But so one thing it does talk about, and you just noted this, is it does talk about how the metaphysics that people oftentimes associate as of the core of what transubstantiation is, it says that that's not actually what the core of it is. But it speaks of it in a way that's much, much more so alignable with where a lot of Anglicans would be. I personally don't mind Aristotelian metaphysics. I actually think they can be helpful, but I understand that a lot of Anglicans would say exactly what I think you just put forward: the mysterious nature of it, of the change. But what it really tries to get at, in my heart, is it tries to hold in tension the meaning coming out of the Carolingian divines in the period of Anglicanism that I believe you just aligned with, the 17th century. And really this notion that it comes down to St. Augustine's view that signs lead to realities, or to the res. And what that does is well, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but it talks about how you can't smash together the substance, like you can't smash together the like
Sign and the thing
yeah, the
signified.
sign and the thing signified, because what that can lead to is it can lead to a view that is Capernitic, right? Which I do believe that that's what like the 39 articles are pushing back on, and I think that it's well espoused then in the 17th century, that kind of it's regrounding St. Augustine's view of how the core of something can be the substance, but it's there's we still make a distinction between the sign and the thing signified. Whereas I do think that in both the time of the Reformation, not dogmatically in my view, but in practice a lot in the Roman Church, and then in the Neo-Thomist movement later on, that is oftentimes how it was viewed in Rome. And so there is pushback against that. But what Archic is kind of saying is that that's not the way that the core of the dogma is actually realized. So it's actually honoring the Anglican principle, but it's still honoring the Roman Catholic principle that it's basically an eschatological doctrine that the Eucharist is about new creation. And so the reason why they had concerns about saying the bread subsisted was because the bread is old creation. Bread never has its telos as bread. It always has its telos as body. And so since it has to live into teleology and into eschatology, it has to be in substance, new creation. And I think that's what Archic's trying to get at. And I actually think that honors both concerns of both sides. But anyways, that would be my just quick thing. I'll let you have the last word, brother. And then again, hopefully we could chop it up more about this. And then Quay, I'm going to bring you on here in just a second, brother. I see you in the live here.
Thank you so much for letting me join. I'd love to do this again.
Yeah.
And if you could shoot me your email or something,
Yeah,
that would be great.
I will, man. I'll shoot it to you in an older back and forth stream or back and forth comment section that we had, just so that I can send it to you that way. So just be on the lookout for that.
Perfect.
Zach, you're a legend, bro. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for just for being so cordial and so kind, man. I'll just know I'll be praying for you and your parish, brother. So
Thank you. Bye.
right on, man. God's peace. All right. Thank you guys so much for waiting. I see I got three others. So Quay, I'm going to bring you up to the stage here. Then I also see Josh, and I see another friend in here as well. So sorry, guys. I know that went pretty long. Quay, how you doing? It's nice to meet you.
Hey.
Hey, how
Can you hear
doing?
me?
It's nice to see your face, by the way. I know you've been commenting for so long.
I feel like I know you, so now you can know me.
So long story made short, Quay, I have to say this. By the way, thank you everyone for joining us. I know I've kind of been in a little zone here talking to Zach. By the way, Zach, it was lovely talking to you, man. God bless you, brother. I really appreciate your good faith engagement and questions. And I hope I'm trying to answer in good faith. I know these are complicated things. But real quick, so everybody in the comment section, thank you guys for commenting. Sorry I haven't, I'm trying to talk and look in the comments and really listen and engage. And then, so forgive me for not engaging a little more in the comment section today. But Quay, I want to say this real quick. I won't say who it is exactly, but somebody who lives in my local area who oftentimes has participated in these reached out to me, and we went out for coffee one day. And it's so funny because he's like, I know you, I've seen you, but you don't even know what I look like necessarily. So anyways,
exactly,
I feel like I know you, but it's great to see your face. So.
That's exactly right. There's a little bit of so there's some really strange delay going on in my head, on my earpiece here.
Oh, no worries. I can hear you fine. If somebody in the comments, if it's really rough, excuse me, guys, please let us know. But I think I can hear you okay, Quay.
So. And I'm hearing you. I'm just hearing many things at once. But
yeah,
I wanted to be real short and sweet here. I mainly just wanted to say hi, give you a big congrats on all your work, the channel. I love everything you're doing. I think I saw you on that first Gospel Simplicity interview you did. Maybe you had
a while back.
Austin on your program, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
And you interviewed him, and I thought, this is my man here. And you introduced me to not the concept as much, but the term, the plane essay.
Yes.
And I had been championing essentially the essence of the plane essay over the last several years. And then I heard you put a, you put a concept you put terminology to my concept.
Yeah.
So I appreciate all the great stuff you're doing. But, one thing I wanted to weigh in here on is I just wanted to offer another Roman Catholic voice to the equation.
Yeah.
Because we both realize there's such a plethora of the more trad positions that are, that come out online. And I got to weigh in and just say that I see nearly like none of that in the various parishes in my community. And I've traveled all over the country, visited many Catholic churches, and there are always these vibrant communities. And something I've been saying lately about, people say, are you Novus Ordo? Are you the 1962 TLM? And I'm like, well, what we call Novus Ordo, we call it Catholic.
Yeah.
We just call it Catholic. But, you did that wonderful video earlier this week about so much of the acrimony that exists online, just all the polemics that are going on, and it just always comes off to me as being for its own sake. It's like winning for the sake of winning. An old guy told me something a long time ago, and it stuck with me. And I actually heard Francis say something really similar to it, but it's just this wise saying, I don't want to be right. I want to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we gotta operate that way.
Yeah.
But, gosh, I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoy everything you're doing.
Yeah.
And, keep it all up, man.
Well, Clay, it's hard to know exactly what to say, man. That is, first off, it's far too kind of you. I really, honestly, I always tell this to people in my real life. I say, I can't really reflect in my facial expressions or my words, how much I actually appreciate that. But just know, and I know you've commented on videos I've done in a lot of different places, Quay, and I've just I really, really genuinely appreciate you, brother. And know that for me, I really value camaraderie that I have with my friends who are in different jurisdictions as well, in different places in Christ Church. And I just I can't tell you enough how much I value you, those kind words you just shared. What's fascinating when you bring up plene esse, Quay, so I spend a lot. I probably spend more time looking into Roman Catholicism than I do into Anglicanism. Just even the happenings in the church, right? I really care about what Pope Leo's doing and who he appointed to which bishopric and all this stuff. And the more time I spend in that world, the more I really do perceive. I my friend calls it the divine logos. I love that language, but it's the will of God, the word of God. And so I think of that scripture passage in the Book of Common Prayer. It's the second song of Isaiah, but the word that goes forth from my mouth will not come to me back to me empty handed, but it will accomplish that for which I sent it. Right. And that's what I perceive to be the divine logos. God's word will consummate his will. And so what I see when I just perceive Vatican II and what's occurred since then, and actually I could go back before then, I could say Anglicanism had a massive learning from Roman Catholicism in the 1800s and the 19th century. And then I think Rome also learned things from us as well, and from other places. And there's been this great coming together. And I just think when we're perceptive of that, to me, it reflects, do you know what it reflects, Quay? I know you've probably heard me say this before, but it reflects Romans 9-11. It's we really learn from the other, really, really deep truths come out. I'll just share this. I won't share the substance of it, but earlier I was talking to my friend TD Barrett. I'm sure you know TD Barrett.
Great guy. Oh, I saw all his episodes. I watch. Yeah, he's a great guy.
And we were really, really on a friend-to-friend level talking about some of the reasons why we are where we are in our past and just reasons what's led us there. And what's fascinating is I well, I want to be careful, with what I share from our personal conversation, but I just think like, I see you in a very similar light to how I see TD. I think we could sit down and I think we'd have a really hard time finding things we disagree about, Quay.
Oh,
And in my mind, that says something about what God is bringing about. And so I realized flagging everything would take a long time, going into every single doctrine, every single piece. But so the plene esse, though, is a concept that I think that branch of Anglicanism that really holds to a strict plene esse is very, very similar to Unitatis Redintegratio. And so that's why I think that language probably speaks to you. But anyways, those are some of my just 2 cents reflections. But I really appreciate your kind words, Quay. I don't know how to even say it enough. So
yeah, I'm just glad you're out there. I really appreciate it. You're like the voice crying out in the desert to me. And because the space is saturated by, and I don't even want to call it trad. I just want to call it polemics.
I know
it's like every tradition has their polemics, and we just really we got to get beyond it, on a grassroots level. But I think about Jesus when he was on earth and how he was talking to everybody.
Yeah.
And like those were all groups that were sort of fading from the world scene. Mm-hmm. But he was affording each of them the dignity that they deserved, and and his message was open to all of them. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. Yeah. I guess just I could talk about a gazillion things that you've done over the course of the channel, but I guess I just wanted to give you the just pop in here and say hey really quick, and keep up the really good work. But
I appreciate
there are. Just speaking from, the Roman Catholic perspective, what is online to me does not reflect the reality of the church.
Yeah.
And certainly what's on the ground has not caught up to where the magisterium is.
Yeah.
Where Vatican II is, where Vatican II intended to lead the church. And all of our popes since Vatican II are making a really heroic effort to implement it, and especially Francis, and now really, really especially Leo. Yeah. So I have such high hopes. I mean, I think we're going to find some degree of greater shared communion in our lifetimes. I have no doubt, about it.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Quay. I didn't mean to cut you off, brother. Sorry if you were finishing up your sentence there.
No, that was it, man.
Oh, okay.
So I just so glad to say hi here, and maybe we can talk in the future.
That sounds fantastic to me. Quay, honestly, I've appreciated you. Man. I appreciate your kindness and your comments so much. In quick reflection on what you're saying, I've said this elsewhere, but I find it helpful because I never know who hears what. So 2 plugs I want to give. One, I totally agree with what you're saying. So again, I go to Roman Catholic Mass a lot. And when I go, the general reflection I get is like one of profound camaraderie. And Novus Ordo parishes, like sometimes online, there's kind of this push to like disparage the Novus Ordo. First off, the Novus Ordo parishes I go to are all packed. They're all jammed. They're all Orthodox. They all have great leadership.
I've never seen an irreverent mass, for the record. So all this talk about clown masses and rock and roll masses, and I have never, ever, ever I've been Catholic 20-ish years, and I have never, ever, ever been to an irreverent mass.
Yeah, neither have I.
It's not a thing.
Yeah,
I'm sure it has existed like 3 times since Vatican II. We've had a clown mass, You know?
Yeah. Well, and
That is
obviously
it.
they're pulling off little like that. People do this with the Episcopal Church too. Now the Episcopal Church has bigger problems than Rome, in my opinion. But there are a lot of faithful Episcopal churches where if you go online, you think every single one of them has like Hindu parts of the service and stuff, and you're like, no, not really, not in general, you know. And again, there's way bigger. I'm not trying to equate Episcopalianism with the Roman Catholic Church because Episcopalians have much bigger problems. But yeah, that's totally, and also the openness to encounters of other Christians. I found that to be like deeply widespread. And so I won't go into too many like personal examples, but I know so many examples of people who like they're Anglicans, but their mentors were Roman Catholic. And there's like, you know, there's encouragement in ministry. Or like people probably don't know this. Pope Leo XIV just called a rector of one of the Church of England parishes that burned down. And he sent him like a personal note, like encouraging this Anglican priest and his ministry and encouraging him and sending his condolences about the church. And like, that's real life, you know? I think of like experiences I've had. This is from neither of our traditions, but when I was a young youth leader at a Methodist church, we used to do this like Thanksgiving service that was like ecumenical. And there was a Greek Orthodox church in the neighborhood. And I remember one time we did a service at the Greek Orthodox church, Quay. And the minister from my church actually gave I don't know if you'd call it a homily, but in a Vesper service, but he gave the sermon at Vespers at the Greek Orthodox church. And at that church, we even had a female associate pastor, and she sat up at the choir with the priest and the other clergy. And I remember after the service, I had this feeling from like encounters with Orthodoxy that like, are they even going to think I'm a Christian? Or, you know, and that really bothered me. Like, and it still bothers me. I remember I went up and talked to the priest afterwards, and I kind of like wanted to see where he was at. And his reflection was like befuddled. He was like, of course I think that you're a Christian. You know what? It was just like, what are you talking about? Like, and I'm so like, that's real life, you know? And it's not to put down that there's important things to work at, but
yeah. Well, you know, one thing I think why maybe I get your vision, you know, I came from Methodism. You know, I was raised Methodist, and then I took a huge personal journey in my life and went into some deeply fundamentalist type Christianity coming out of my teens into my early and as I was coming into my early 30s, there started to be some deep theological questions that fundamentalism wasn't answering for me. And I took the journey back that led me to the Catholic Church. But, you know, in the early 2000s, I don't know if there wasn't a real Anglican presence in my area.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's been a development over the last 20 years that I see a lot going on in Anglicanism now, and even Methodism. You know, the Methodism of today is way different than what was just like a generic evangelical church when I was part of it in the, you know, and I'm old. I go back, you know, you guys talk about being old on this channel. I'm the old guy. I go back to, you know, the 70s and the 80s and, you know, the UMC.
Yeah.
But going through so many, you know, shifting opinions so often throughout my journey, you know, you do that and you develop a little bit of, an understanding for people who are developing their thinking. And you know, Francis mentioned this, and it was probably towards the end of his run, but he started talking about various schools of thought, you know, talking about the different traditions, whether it be the East or the Coptic, or, you know, or the various Protestants, Anglicans, you know, that we don't define things exactly the same, but these are schools of thought. You know, it's almost like doctrinal theory in a way. Like we're all doing our best. And many times I think we're using the language of our traditions to talk about theology. So when a Lutheran talks about theology, they're using Lutheran terminology, Lutheran concepts, Lutheran paradigms. You know, Catholics are using Catholic paradigms, Anglicans, and fundamentalists, evangelicals, all the way down. So, you know, when we get into these dialogues and we really have a productive dialogue, so many times we say, we are we are like a hair's breadth away from not saying exactly the same thing. But
yeah,
I don't know. I'm hopeful.
I totally agree, Quay. And
I'm hopeful.
I think sometimes, I mean, I don't think this is true with everywhere, but I do think between Anglicanism and Roman Catholicism, oftentimes it's not even a hair's breadth. I think sometimes it's fully convergent.
It's strictly formal, and Balthasar has this concept in his book Mysterium Paschale, right towards the end, where he talks about the church of love and the church of office. There's, he uses St. John as emblematic of the church of love. And then St. Peter is the church of office. And often the church of love arrives at the destination before the church of office. Then the church of office arrives and formalizes what the church of love has already seen. So it's St. John arriving at the tomb, but waiting and deferring to St. Peter to go in first. And Balthasar
really
goes through several of these really beautiful examples. But I think you're right in terms of as the church of love stands, exactly what Leo said. We are one. We already are. And let us. How do you know it better than me? Let us live it.
He says, let us recognize it, experience it, and make it visible. Yeah.
See, you have it down better than me.
Oh, I'm telling you, I follow those developments like white on rice. By the way, for those who don't know, you should go and check it out. So, and by the way, Josh and Andrew, I see you guys in the chat here, so we'll get to you in a minute.
Yeah, I got a bump here, because I gotta let you get to those guys, and I'm working tonight. I got work to do.
It's probably late where you
are. So enjoyed chatting with you here.
Quay, it's my pleasure, brother. I really appreciate you, and again, I just I can't possibly say thank you enough, and I just want to encourage you in your ministry as well. Anyways, I
just realize, I love being provocative in my comments. So sometimes I go a little hard just because I like playing devil's advocate and make it, laying out the absolute extremes sometime to provoke a discussion.
The deeper things. You're really being God's advocate is who you're being, Quay.
That's right. Yeah. I know. I have people that say you're not being the devil's advocate.
But hey,
you're
God's advocate.
You so good talking to you. You move on.
Likewise, Quay.
Get to these other folks, and I'll sit here working and listen to the whole thing.
Sounds good, brother. Sounds good, man. Appreciate you, Quay. Godspeed,
great
brother.
Seeing you, man.
Likewise, my man.
Peace
out, brother. Right on. Hey, Josh, I'm going to bring you up here in just a second, and then Andrew, I'll bring you up next. I know this is taking a little bit of a second. Just real quick, I want to say this before I pull you up here, Josh. What we're talking about is at St. Paul's outside the walls at the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity earlier this year. Pope Leo was standing next to Anthony Ball, who's the Anglican representative at the Anglican Center in Rome. He's the representative of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he was standing next to the representative of the Ecumenical Patriarch. And he looks at them and he says, "We are one. We already are. Let us recognize it, experience it, and make it visible." Now, if you're going to break that down from an Anglican paradigm, recognize it seems like talking about the breadth of where the church subsists in a real and substantial way. I obviously don't want to pin him down. It's complicated. There's already an acknowledgement of that in Unitatis Redintegratio through baptism. So he could be talking there, obviously, from the Anglican paradigm. We would see that sacramentally in the Mass and the oneness of the Mass as well. But then he also says, let us recognize it visibly, let us recognize it, experience it. Experience it to me sounds like sacramental union, and then make it visible. So that speaks for itself. So anyways, those are some important points of reflection. All right, Josh, I'm going to bring you up here, brother. I know you've been waiting for a while. Josh, how you doing tonight, brother?
I'm doing very well. I wanted to let you know, Andrew and I were talking in the private chat that he can go first since he's on a bit more of a time crunch than I am.
Oh, okay. Sweet. Yeah, okay. I'll go ahead and pull up Andrew. Thank you, Josh. Sorry, man. I know you've been waiting a long time.
No problem.
I'm here being long-winded. All right, brother. I'll pull up Andrew real quick then. Andrew, how you doing, man? Thanks for waiting. Sorry, it's been a little while.
Hey, how's it going, man? Can you hear me well? Or
yeah, I can hear you great, brother. Thanks for waiting again. Sorry, I know I get long-winded, bro.
Yeah, no problem. I just had to leave in around 30 minutes. So I just wanted to
no worries at all, man.
I'm really thankful for being able to come in.
Yeah. Yeah, for
I
sure.
haven't been watching you for a long time. I just discovered you probably in the last month or so.
Cool.
And it's been interesting because I've gone through probably like the most painful 2 months of my life because of this Catholic Anglican division. Just to give you a short history of me, I was born and raised in the charismatic evangelical circles, not in North America, in Asia. So my mom was born and raised as a Catholic, but later when she met my dad, she became sort of like a charismatic Christian. And I grew up in that area, and when I was a kid, we moved to Canada, so now I live in Canada.
Cool.
But and I attend a mainline Anglican church, locally. But I was baptized in the PCA, so that's the Presbyterian Church of America, and I would never really agree with the Westminster Confession that closely. So I eventually made the transition to the Anglican Church. But within this time, this is getting a bit personal, but I started dating this girl 2 years ago. She was a Catholic, and I was an Anglican at this point. And we had a great relationship. Everything was amazing. But there was this one hiccup. She's Catholic, I'm Anglican, right? And we're trying to make this work. And this almost went through well until just like in the past month, we ended up breaking up over the fact that she had a really hard time with the fact that I wasn't Catholic. And I think the last thing that broke the camel's straw for her was the fact that I was not totally in agreement, that's a word, with her. She wanted to do the True Devotion to Mary by St. Louis de Montfort. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I don't know if I have, actually.
Well, so like for me, I never had a problem with general Marian veneration. I never practiced it, just coming from that sort of low evangelical background. But I was open to her, like doing the rosary, things like that, right? But with Saint Louis de Montfort, he's sort of like the most extreme.
Yeah, I know. I think I know who you're talking about.
But a part of this is like you consecrate yourself to Mary as like a slave of Mary. And there's even some theological things like, you have to go through Mary in order to get to Jesus, which, I had personal theological problems with. And I wondered, what was your perspective on that sort of Marian devotion? Because I know you have a general sense of agreement with Catholics on Marian devotion. I'm more neutral about it, but when it comes to the more extreme side of things, I tend to be more hesitant. So I wonder what you thought.
Yeah, man. I guess I just first want to, like, for the sake of just, I don't want to just go into intellectual things, but I'm sorry that you've been struggling with that, man. Man, I mean, obviously my journey is very different, but I've spent probably 5+ years, certainly in the past, like super mentally strapped with these questions. So like on a personal note, I understand the gravity and the weight of like the pain there. So it's a little different because my wife's not Roman Catholic. She's very pro Roman Catholicism like I am, but she's an Anglican, but I understand, like, as much as I can, like the weight and the burden of those things. So for one, I just know my empathy and prayers go out that way. Secondly, I do want to ask, where are you in I'm actually half Canadian, man, which is really cool. Where are you from in Canada?
Right now I live in Alberta. I grew up most out east in the Maritimes and in Newfoundland. But right now I live in like the middle of the nowhere in Alberta.
Yeah, that's so cool. My sister was born in Edmonton.
Oh, cool.
So,
I lived in Edmonton for a short while, but
that's so cool. Yeah, my grandfather worked for Canadian National. So anyways, they lived all over.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
But I love that, man. And my dad worked for the NAR, the Northern Alberta Railway. So anyways, that's so cool.
Nice.
So there's a connection there. But so okay, if you don't feel comfortable answering this, I don't want to like pin you down, I guess just a question I would have is, again, I oftentimes go back to sociology and to like, where are people's dispositions coming from? Because I do even find within Roman Catholicism, right, there's a massive like breadth of how people view this. Would your then girlfriend, would she have been more like, would she have been labeled in more the trad camp, or would she have been kind of a kind of a general Roman Catholic, kind of a more centrist Roman Catholic?
That's a really interesting question, and a good question, I think. So her mom was very traditional Catholic. Okay. Like sort of like she had problems with Pope Leo, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
But my girlfriend was, interestingly, at this time, she was more wrapped up in the charismatic, evangelical-ish Catholicism. Okay. So like even Marian veneration, like she did the rosary all the time, that sort of thing. But like this sort of thing was not in her sort of purview, but her mom did this devotion, and then one of her close like seminarian friends also did this, and she said she felt called to do this. So it was sort of like a quick switch from going from like this charismatic Catholic, like she more than she loves like traditional Catholic music, she listens to CCM. You know, like that's the sort of Catholic she is. She's not very trad. She's not a liberal. She's not liberal, but I'd say she's a normal Catholic that tends to be near the charismatic Catholic circles with like student will and that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That makes so much sense, man. It just helps me give a little bit. I want to be super careful how I say these things, man, because obviously these are like super complicated. So just like in Anglicanism, there's like a huge breadth of different camps, right? And where people find themselves. But I think there can still be a centrist Anglican position that's argued for. Like I would still contend that even with all the churchmanship and, complexity of Anglicanism. I'd say that's somewhat similar with Roman Catholicism, but where you'll find very different things, right? Like, so recently, Pope Leo XIV, under his pontificate, it was put out by Cardinal Fernandez, right, in the DDF, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, put out a document. I don't remember what it's called. I think it's like Mater Populi or something like that, but it's on Mary. And basically what it does is it pulls back certain language that has historically been used for Mary in many Roman Catholic circles. And in a sense, it's a very large nod to Protestant concerns. So there are two particular titles that they recommend not using. And the reason they recommend not using them is not because there's not a way that you can like nuance them if you're really, really careful and like give all sorts of distinctions. But it's because when these terms are used, they oftentimes will lead the general laity to a perception of Mary that is not necessarily accurate, which is so Marian devotion should always have a telos in Christ, right? Always. And in proper Roman Catholic theology, it does. But so the two terms that they recommend not using are co-mediatrix. And the second one, I would be curious if this would be similar to the type of language that you'd find in the figure you were naming, is co-mediatrix of all graces. Or excuse me, I think I said the one is co-redemptrix and the second is co-mediatrix of all graces. Those are the two terms they recommend not using. Now, again, it's not because they can't go back in the 17th century or the 19th century even and find ways of nuancing those to find a telos in Jesus, but because people oftentimes took those terms and their devotion to Mary became more so focused on Mary as an object in and of herself. And that's what the Vatican is actually trying to clarify and push back on in their modern reflections. And so it's really a big nod. Like even Jordan Cooper put out a video like saying this is a great document. And the reason I bring that up is like if one were to call Mary the co-mediatrix of all graces, it's giving this notion that all grace comes from Jesus, but then through Mary and then is dispensed out to the faithful. And it's saying that that's not real. Like Mary in proper theology is a type for the church, right? And so in that, we can find ways of nuancing that language where you're saying like if you're giving yourself in devotion to Mary, it's because you're giving yourself in devotion to the body of Christ, of which she's a type. And so then ultimately it has its telos in Jesus. But I think that it can be taken too far. And certainly in certain cultures in Roman Catholicism, certainly those that are older, that go back pre-Vatican II and that are ingrained in different parts of the world, it sometimes can need to be reeled in. So I guess my general reflection is the type of Anglicanism I hold is always looking for points of convergence. So like I can look at these different texts and things and find a way to have them find consonance. But I do think one of the things, so sorry, bro, and then I'll stop this here. I just can ramble forever. I hope this is helpful. But in my reflection, when I think of why I'm an Anglican, which is something I have to reckon with a lot, there are some things that are just hard. Like I do believe the church is predominantly sacramental, even beyond jurisdictional. I think it's sacramental. So baptism and the Eucharist, I think that provides an ontological unity. I think that Anglicans, I think our emphasis on being set right so we can be right setters, like the way we parse out justification, I actually think is really helpful. And I think that it's actually what is espoused now in the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification. But one of the other ones that's important to me is an emphasis, and I like this word emphasis. It's an emphasis on the work of Christ. So like if we read the Book of Common Prayer, it really emphasizes the place of Christ in the work of salvation. And so I, in my own devotion, do think it's important to emphasize the centrality of Christ. But I also am able to do that. And maybe this is because of, again, just like the way that my mind has been formed in the English tradition. I'm more comfortable with soaking in the light from other traditions, such as like veneration of the saints and certainly veneration of the Blessed Mother. And I'm able to finding a place within that. So I think Anglicanism can have a helpful emphasis there, but I don't think it's ipso facto means that it can't be aligned with proper, like I've got a rosary right here, bro, that I got from the Holy Land. Like I love praying the rosary, to be honest with you. And I know you're talking about more like, extreme types of Marian devotion. But I do think that there's a beautiful way they can be properly aligned. Does that help at all? I don't know if I'm even answering your question there. I think there's a way it can be oriented right.
It makes sense. Like for me, I mean, to be honest, you said a lot there, which I want to touch on. But for me personally, I never really had an issue with Catholics having that sort of Christ-centered Marian devotion. Like I had this thought yesterday that I sent to my friend while I was just thinking, and I thought, like, we're supposed to be devoted to our wives, to each other in the church, and that sort of devotion, like devotion and idolatry, they are sort of two opposites, because devotion can only happen if you have love, and idolatry can only be present if love is taken away. Right. So I think that people can fall into idolatry, just like you can fall into idolatry if you're your wife or somebody else in your life, your children, whatever, someone that you really love. I think you can fall into idolatry with even these saints, and veneration of them and adoration of them, because there is a proper place that I can see very clearly for that to happen. And I did find it quite
Andrew,
amazing.
I'm losing you a little bit here, brother. I'm so sorry.
Oh, is it still bad, or is it? How's the connection now?
Andrew, can you hear me okay, brother? You're going in and out a little bit just over the last like 20 seconds.
I can hear you quite well. I don't know. Can you hear me well, or is it still bad?
Oh, Andrew, I'm so sorry, man. Oh, Andrew, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Dude, I do not know what happened. I am so sorry, everybody. My Wi-Fi just like cut out.
Yeah, I started seeing you getting pixelated, and I was like, what's going on?
Sorry, you started cutting out on my end, and I was like, oh no. And then I see mine going out, and I'm like, oh, here we go again. Sorry, everybody. Anyways, please. So I heard you. Sorry, can you go back like maybe 2 minutes in what you were saying?
No, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I see a lot of what you're saying, and I agree with it, because for a long time, my thoughts have been that you can have proper adoration and veneration and devotion to saints. Yes, especially in the last couple of days when I was thinking about this, there's a proper way to do that. And I've found it beautiful that with new Pope Leo, with the statements that he brought up on Mary being a co-mediator or a co-redeemer, sort of dialing back the tone on those sorts of things. Because I had this funny story a year or a year and a half ago, I think. I had this close Catholic friend who was in his process of going into seminary. And I actually had a conversation just on this, on the titles of Mary being a co-mediator or a co-redeemer. Really? And he was going tooth and nail trying to defend this, saying, you know, there's absolutely no issue. There's no way that this can be taken in a wrong light. And it felt good when the document came out.
Leo puts that out.
It's like, let's go. But for me, I guess the main question is like, how do you perceive, like, how would an Anglican, like, if, for example, in my scenario, like, I'm trying to talk to my girlfriend about this book, and it's using language that is kind of extreme like that. Like St. Louis de Montfort says that Mary is the mediatrix of all graces. Like that's a phrase that he uses in that book. He also says that you ought to, the final prayer in this devotion is that you consecrate yourself as like the slave of Mary. And then you acknowledge that it is only through Mary that you are saved. Now, I can see that you can sort of get into that logically by saying, well, Mary had to be here in like a historical sense for Christ to be here. So you were saved through Mary in that way. But like, I see the same sort of problems coming up. And with my girlfriend, really, or ex-girlfriend now, the issue was like, she wasn't willing to really have a conversation on it.
Yeah.
Because the devotion, she said, has to be done. Like you just have to go into it without like actually doing research on what you're going into. So it's like in this weird position, like the Catholic is telling me that I can't even like reason with them on a subject like this, because the only way you can discuss the devotion is by doing it. Like it's like this tricky position. Like how do I approach that? Do you have any guidance on that, or no?
That's a really real question, bro. I'm going to try to give you a really real answer, man. And I hope this comes across as like authentically as I can. I was talking to, do you know who TD Barrett is, bro? I've done a lot of dialogues with him.
Is he the guy in seminary right now in the Shoda house? Is that the guy?
No, that's Samuel. He's super cool. No, TD Barrett, he's Roman Catholic. But he's like a very just like ecumenical Vatican II Roman Catholic. I think he's like a real Roman Catholic. I think he's like I think he espouses where Rome's actually at.
I see.
So I was just talking to him about this, and anyways, this is kind of where I find myself. Okay. When I talk to, I'll use a political example but this is true with theology as well. When I talk to like, I'm pretty conservative just in general, but when I talk to people who are more liberal, I think I come across like a wild conservative, because I'm always like trying to call them to deeper forms of thought. But then what's so fascinating is when I spend time in like really conservative circles, they're probably like, who's this liberal? Like he's giving like any sort of like trying to understand it all, like where these people might be, some of their reflections come from. And so what ends up happening for people like me is I mean, so low. I don't intend to, but you kind of end up just like ticking off everybody. And you kind of like back yourself into a corner where you're very much so an anomaly, because you're always trying to call different people. So I do this all the time on my channel, right? So when I talk on my channel, I spend so much time trying to get Anglicans to be more pro-Roman Catholic. I'm sure they come away thinking, this guy's just like, he's anti-Anglican and just pro-Roman Catholic. But what's fascinating is if I were to spend time in the type of Roman Catholic circles you're talking about, they'd probably think I was like a wild Protestant, because I might be calling them to like reflect on some of these things and go like, where do you see this practice leading people to on the ground? Right.
Yeah.
And so if I were to spend a lot of time in the circles that you're talking about, when I find myself in those circles, sometimes I then realize how Anglican I actually am, because I go, I just think in a different way, in a different pattern with these types of things, you know? And so a lot of people, I think, find themselves there. But the way that that's pertinent to this question, and kind of like where I've found myself, is I've come to the place where I am comfortable praying reasonable Marian like prayers, you know, like reasonable veneration to the saints, you know, like reasonable prayers that I still believe are offered ultimately to God, but that, you know what I mean, we're asking for the saints to intercede for us as well. I've become comfortable with that, but in my mind, that's grounded in a deeper theology that is very Anglican, that always has an emphasis on Christ. So sometimes in my mind, when I've even like, I've decided sometimes, like one, for example, I'll just say there's a beautiful novena called Mary, Undoer of Knots. And when I've prayed that before, certain parts of it, not co-mediatrix of all graces, but certain language comes up that would not usually be in Anglican circles. And in my mind, as I'm saying this, I try to translate it to say like, these types of things, if what they mean by this is, well, since Mary's a type for the church, you're really giving yourself to the body of Christ. And so Jesus, you know, however, so there's a way I nuance that. However, in my like general prayer life and devotional life, I've mentioned this before, the Book of Common Prayer, which is extremely centered on Christ and on the person and work of Christ, I do think that there's help in that emphasis. So in general, I find myself actually at the core being very, very Anglican, because my prayer life is really predominantly centered around Christ. However, I've come to a place where reasonable Marian devotion, I can nuance that in such a way that I recognize that it still has that telos. But when you're dealing with somebody who comes from a different background and kind of like way of approaching it, I can see how that'd be tough, man. And I think that I will say, just this is relationship advice on Nicaea 3 for anybody. Not that I'm fully qualified to give that, but I guess I would just say, like, when I've talked to my buddies in person, I do think that people, if you're going into a real relationship, you do have to be at a place where you can really find deep consonance in your theological convictions. And so it's tough, because I could see that totally happening with certain Roman Catholics, right? But then I think there are other Roman Catholics who are a little bit, they're just at a different place. And so it would be much harder with them. And so those tough things, the other person, you know, like you have to be able to be on the same page in general about where the ultimate devotion should be given. I'm not saying that she wouldn't have that, but you know, like, I'll give an example. I can, like, just one last example, bro. This is a totally different example, and God's peace to him. I'm not trying to, but like, if I sometimes, when I hear certain things come out of people like Saint Padre Pio, okay, you notice I feel comfortable calling him Saint Padre Pio. However, if I were to really get into some of the things he says, it would make me very uncomfortable. Some of it might make me very, very uncomfortable. And so I've come to a place where I can go, okay, this person's from a different era. He comes from a different theological background. I think that God can honor where he comes from. I still think that it ultimately can be reframed and should be in the way that I think is well espoused in the Anglican Church. And so I can still honor and revere this person, but also note that they needed to change. And so I brought up much earlier with the first with Zach, who I was dialoguing at the beginning, that like I spent time in the South dealing with people. Like, my family's from the North and my mom's side. They're from Pennsylvania. But when I spent time in this, and I'll just say it, my wife is Black. So, you know, so obviously I'm a son of the Union. But my point is, when I spent time in the South and really got to like read personal letters from Civil War soldiers from the South, they're not like monstrous people, right? And so there's a way you can honor the person and their intentions and still disagree with maybe some of the ways they worded things. And I guess that's kind of my general approach to large swath of questions, as I try to honor that which is true, try to find a place with it within a larger epistemic of God's will. But I can still clarify and say, but the real core of the truth is this. I don't know if that helps in any way, brother, but those are...
No, I think that point is, it's really helpful. I do have to leave right now, but I just wanted to say, like, I think that point is really good about sticking to your convictions and also having that sort of charity as you're approaching all these people. Because, like, I know for a fact, like my girlfriend, even when she was mentioning this devotion, what she was saying was that I am devoting myself to Jesus through Mary, or consecrating myself to Jesus through Mary. That's the language that she was using. Now, this is not the language that St. Louis de Montfort is using in the book, but her mindset is like, no, like Jesus is the end point. Like Jesus is the end point. Yeah. So like I give her that charity. I gave her that charity. But yeah, thank you so much for taking my call. Hopefully we can speak again.
It's my honor, brother. Appreciate you, Andrew. And it was just wonderful to meet you, brother. I'll be praying the best for you and just for your situation, man. So
thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. God's peace, my man.
But
take care, bro. All right, Josh, I'm finally going to bring you on here. I just want to say real quickly before I do, again, sorry I cut out, guys. By the way, I see Boomball put up this comment real quick. I will get to this after I have Josh come on, because Josh has been waiting quite a while, but I'll get to this later down if you're still with us, bro. Also, guys, I reposted the StreamYard link. If anybody else does want to join, I just have Josh waiting in the chat. So after Josh, I don't have anybody else. If anybody else would like to come on, please feel free. I'd love to continue dialoguing with anybody, who'd like to hop in the chat. Hope this is helpful, guys. I've never done this before. This is really cool. It's much more fun than just talking to myself, looking at the camera. Not really talking to myself, but... Oh, sweet. I see another second son. I see you in the chat. So I'm going to get to Josh quick, brother, and then I'll get to you as well. So, all right, Josh, I'm going to bring you on. How you doing, brother?
You hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Dude, thank you so much. That was super kind of you to let Andrew go first, because I know he had to get going.
No, I'm not on much of a time crunch, so I just wanted to say that. And I'm sorry if my voice is shot. I'm getting over a little bit of a crud that I had in the back of my throat.
No, you're fine, man. Dude, I'm just loving this glass window picture you got. That's fire, bro.
Yeah, it's a picture of Saint Stephen, right? He looks up to the heavens and he says, "Behold, I see the heavens have opened."
I love it, man. I actually, just not to, but I've actually been to the martyrdom site of Saint Stephen. It is really, really cool. If anybody gets to go to the Holy Land, you should definitely go to the martyrdom site. Anyways, that's really neat. But brother,
I'll be able to visit that one day.
Yeah, God willing, man. God willing. The stained glass is very Anglican looking, by the way. I do have to say that as well.
Yes, of course.
It's great. All right, brother. So yeah, man. So what do you want to throw out there tonight?
So my first thing, I just wanted to ask you a somewhat of a personal question, because you've mentioned before that you attend full-time an Episcopal church and an ACNA church. I wanted to ask, which jurisdiction are you confirmed in? Yeah,
I was confirmed in the ACNA.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's I'm not going to turn that into a discussion topic. That was just something that I had rolling around.
Oh, yeah. So I grew up in the UMC and then moved into Anglicanism, and I went to an ACNA parish. But then, long story made short, I wanted to go to midweek mass as well. And there was an Anglo-Catholic, more conservative Episcopal church in my area that did midweek mass. I ended up going there a lot for midweek. And then one night, it was actually on the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, which just recently happened. This is years ago. The guest priest who came in to give the homily, I ended up striking up a friendship with, and then that's the Episcopal church. I actually got this BCP from them for being a volunteer. Anyways, that's where I go in the morning, and then I go to the ACNA church in the evening. So yeah,
very cool. Yeah, so the discussion topic, it's two discussions, but one of them, just because we've mentioned it in my time chatting with you before, being in your chat, we've mentioned talking about REC holy orders before. So I was going to say that we can have a little bit of a conversation about that.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
So I wanted to ask, I know generally what the talking points are against the validity of their holy orders, or at least I don't know if against would be the right word, but to cast doubt, to ask the question. Right, I know the general talking points. I just want to ask, what are your main points there?
Ooh, man, this is dicey. Well, I guess, sorry, this is very Anglican of me, and it's also just what people who talk about theology online, maybe I think in some ways should do, but I have to qualify it ahead of time. I think that the discernment of the church in this is going to be way higher than any personal discernment I can give. And the discernment of the ACNA is that the orders are valid, and the discernment of people who I really respect, like Bishop Chandler Holder Jones, is pro REC orders. So I would defer people to those discernments over any reflections I may have. So I do want to qualify with that because I think that's really important. By the way, Bishop Chandler Holder Jones, just for those who don't know, the presiding bishop of the APA, I'm going to have him on the channel here soon, and he is just such a gracious man of God. Just my little interactions with him, he is an incredibly authentic man of God. So that's why I want to be very careful. He has an article on this, Josh. I don't know if you've read it. That is like,
I believe I have.
It's super in depth going through this. And it talks about how it goes into even the arguments of like apostolic curiae and all sorts of stuff. And Pius Officio, and it goes into the ordinal and also. So I will say from my end, I do struggle a little bit. I don't even remember what the bishop's name was. Excuse me. It was the Bishop of Fond du Lac in the late 19th century. He was very Anglo-Catholic, time of the Oxford movement. Do you remember his name?
I don't believe I do.
I believe even like Joe from the Young Anglican YouTube channel has spoken of him before. But anyways, there's a very famous bishop. If you put in Bishop of Fond du Lac 19th century on Google, you could probably find it. But I do believe
Charles Grafton.
Yes, I believe that he questioned REC holy orders for similar reasons to what apostolic curiae spoke about with Anglican holy orders. Namely, was a sacerdotal priesthood rejected by the Declaration of Principles in 1873? And what's hard is when you read them on their surface, they do seem to. They're kind of more like what I perceive like the Black Rubric to be like, right? From like the 1552.
Sure.
Which I definitely don't accept. However, I also want to honor people like Ray Sutton who have found different ways to nuance it. And I want to honor people like Bishop Chandler Holder Jones who have done a deep dive on this to kind of talk about how the ordinal still spoke about the intention carrying on, right? So it does get into that very like fine question of when is the intention, if we're going to use like scholastic basically ways of parsing out what a valid sacrament is, which I would hold. It comes down to the intention, right? And so because the form is there, the matter is there, the minister is there, but the question is the intention to actually consecrate a sacerdotal priest. And what I know Bishop Chandler Holder Jones will get into, and this is similar to the arguments that Anglicans made, that in the ordinal, right, and around the words of institution, there is still kind of a central framework that surrounds the ex opere operato words of institution that speak of a continuity of the sacerdotal priesthood. It's tough because if you look just at the declarations, they do seem to reject that. But again, that's where I want to defer. From my personal point of view, I would just say that it does cause me scruples in my conscience. And I also struggle a little bit with, to my knowledge, I don't think the REC orders have the Dutch touch. Now, I'm not saying that I think Anglicans need the Dutch touch to be valid, but I do think that it's something that's helpful towards the eschatological church. Now, where this is also complicated is this is being remedied in the ACNA. So like the modern bishops of the REC have the laying on of hands from the rest of the ACNA. So it would have the Dutch touch or the old Catholic orders infused into their orders. So I do think this will definitely get remedied historically, like in the next couple decades. I'm just saying, for me personally, when I've reflected on like, could I be ordained in the REC and feel totally at peace with my orders? Those questions sometimes cause me scruples. But again, or even like if I receive the sacraments from somebody without, you know what I mean, from those orders. But ultimately, our jurisdiction accepts them, and people I really respect accept them. And so I want to make sure that I don't speak on that which I know not. That would be just my quick. So my general impetus would be to say, if the church accepts them, then I do too. However, I would be dishonest if I didn't say that a little bit of scruples because of some of those reasons in my conscience.
Sure, and I think that that's right and just. I think it's a good thing that you have those questions, because somebody has to ask the questions. Because if us Anglicans don't ask the questions about our own tradition, then the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox are going to ask those questions of us, and we're not going to have good answers.
Yeah.
So it is important that we ask those questions. But I would just ask this one question on the surface, just to see if I'm on the same page as you. you would say that in the sacrament of holy orders, that the intention is to ordain to the sacerdotal priesthood. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. So then, would you use that as the definition of what it means to intend to do what the church does in this sacrament?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
If I'm understanding you correctly, yes. But what that doesn't mean, though, some individual people, and this is where it gets complicated, individual people can potentially misunderstand it. But if their intention is still to do what the church does, there can still be valid intention.
Of course.
So, yeah, do you want me to elaborate on that a little, bro? I don't want to cut you off in your train of thought, bro.
So I'll just go for a little bit, and then
Okay.
if I end up
Yeah,
misunderstanding you, then you can correct me. Please. But so just to ask this question, something like a non-denominational or a Baptist baptism, we would both agree that those are valid baptisms, even though they do not intend to bestow the ex operato grace of regeneration in baptism.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So then my parallel here, and obviously this is not a 100% defeater argument to all of the questions about REC holy orders, but this is generally what grounds my thinking of if I can acknowledge that a Baptist or a non-denominational who almost creedally would say, no, baptism does not save. In fact, some of these non-denominationals of Baptists nowadays are saying, oh, if you believe that, then you're not saved, right? Because they think sola fide is a dogma in that sense. But to digress, if I can acknowledge that their baptisms are valid because they intend to do what the church does, even though they don't intend what the church intends, I would still be able to say that REC holy orders would be valid because they intend to do what the church does, even if they do not intend what the church intends. And obviously that would be at the time of those ordinations. Obviously now the REC is one of the more Anglo-Catholic jurisdictions. So obviously today there's no question about if that intent is there. But
yeah. What's so fascinating, man, this is very similar to the argument Chandler Holder Jones makes, Bishop Jones makes. So I believe it was in the 1870s, if I'm getting the date right. He talks about, and I looked this up. I first heard this on the Sacramentalist podcast from Bishop Chandler Holder Jones, and I went, that's really interesting. In the 1870s, I don't know if you're familiar, Josh, or anybody else, but in the Roman Catholic Church, the way that things work is sometimes people will ask theological questions that there's some ambiguity about. And what they'll do is they'll put forward what they call dubia questions, D-U-B-I-A. They'll put out dubia questions to the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith to reflect upon, and then basically in an official, like magisterial reflection, they're responded to. And those responses do have actual like magisterial weight to a certain degree. In the 1870s, there was a dubia question put forward to the Vatican about exactly precisely what you're discussing. So what they were asking is, at that time, they were actually Methodist. So actually, and Methodists generally do believe in baptismal regeneration. So these were erroneous Methodist views, but there were Methodists in Polynesia, I believe. So in the South Pacific, who in the services where they were baptizing were outwardly giving sermons rejecting baptismal regeneration.
And this is very common today, even in Baptist or non-denominational.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They're very strongly saying, no, this isn't going to save you. This isn't yada, 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 but.
Exactly. And they asked, does that then negate having the proper intention when it comes to these scholastic categories? In the Vatican itself in the 1870s, now keep in mind, this is prior to Apostolic Curiae. So Bishop Chandler Holder Jones was speaking about this in reference to Anglican holy orders from the 1890s. They responded in the negation to that question, and they said, no, actually the intention is still valid, because so they were asking, are they invalid? And the Vatican said, no, they are valid because they still intend to do what the church does, using the language you just used, which is the proper language. They intend to do what the church does, even if they don't believe what the church believes. And there's a very important distinction there about what does it mean to do what the church does versus what does it mean to intend what the church intends. Now, the reflection that I like to give to just paint a clear contrast here, Anglicans and Roman Catholics, I would say, are in lockstep about these points when it comes to baptism. We would absolutely, like you noted, accept Baptist baptisms and like non-denominational baptisms if they have the proper form and matter. However, we would not accept Mormon baptisms. So somehow, because Mormon baptisms reject even Trinitarian theology, they're not doing what the church does. But a Baptist, even if they don't understand baptismal regeneration, is intending to do what the church does, even if even if they're not believing what the church believes. So there is, so I do think that can hold a lot of water. Somehow, though, there's a distinction made in apostolic curiae between now, and Bishop Chandler Holder Jones uses exactly the line of argumentation you just used to argue against apostolic curiae. But somehow in the Vatican's mind, they parsed out a distinction here between the Baptist baptism answer they gave and then the answer when it came to holy orders. I think a little bit of place where I would find some difference between the apostolic curiae argument, which I think Sapius Officio, the Anglican response, is a good response to, and an apt response to. I don't believe that Anglicans did actually reject orders, or reject the sacerdotal priesthood in the same way that the REC did. Right?
I would 100% agree with you. I don't think that there was that rejection. There may have been. You can make this argument of some individuals, some individual bishops from that early 15th, 16th, 17th century who may have denied it, but there was never an official denial of it, at least not in the same way that the REC did. Yeah.
And that's where I think my conscience, scrupulosity around this question. But I do think that the general principle you're sharing holds, that if it holds for baptism, why does it not hold here? I guess it's a question, and I'm not sure I'm learned enough to speak specifically on the REC ordinal. I think it would go down to what was actually changed in the rites of ordination. So, so in the ordinal itself, and then in the entire liturgy surrounding the ex opere moment, I would ask what actually was said and what was done. And I guess I'm not learned enough to say, but that's a little bit beyond my pay grade. But I do think that's where the question comes down to, is we don't want to find having orders within our ranks that are guilty of what. So like if anybody's been on Twitter following Sean Luke's been really defending the sacerdotal ontological nature of the priesthood in early Anglican sources on Twitter. And I certainly agree with that and with him on that. I do think that I do think that we can say with confidence Anglicans held that sacerdotal notion in the 16th century at the core dogmatic ordinal level. I do think it's a little bit more challenging when it comes to the REC. Again, either way, this is going to be remedied in the next 20 years with new ordinations or new consecrations. So ultimately, this isn't going to have to get answered. But I do think that it
is a very interesting thought.
Yeah,
and it's something that needs to be thought about.
It is, and it's tough for me. Most people don't even think about this stuff, and I understand why.
Somebody said it in the chat earlier that the reason one of the continuing groups, I think they said that they were in the ACC, they said that one of the reasons why they're so scrupulous about holy orders and about the validity is because they hope to one day, I don't remember the language, but I think it was to play with the big dogs, right? To get in that conversation with the people who have the valid holy orders with very little doubt, right? So people like the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox.
Well, it's like those groups a first step, I think, is with the Polish National Catholic Church, right? And so they want to move with those, which may happen in the next decade, to be honest.
Sure.
But the strength of your holy orders really matters. I want to be careful because people who I really respect and who are extraordinarily learned, like Gerald McDermott, people like him, other people in the REC, Bishop Ray Sutton certainly is extremely learned. I would not feel comfortable saying that their orders are not valid. I guess just for me, I do think that there's something to being in the more mainstream line of orders within Anglicanism, of which the ACNA has, right? And the male bishops in the Episcopal Church have, the properly ordained ones. And so in my mind, that's a safer place to be. But what's hard for me is sometimes I look at the REC and I love so much about it. So, again, this is something that ultimately we're not going to have to discern because it will be remedied in the next 20 years. It already is remedied by certain bishops who have already been ordained since the formation of the ACNA.
The REC has joined in with the ACNA.
Yeah. It's a tough one, man. I don't exactly know what to say, but I do think that there is like why did people like Bishop Grafton believe Anglican orders were valid, believe that we could accept baptisms, but they didn't accept REC orders? I do think there's a question there, but again, I also don't want to negate orders, and I think the church ultimately has a more authoritative and important position than I would. So,
Of course.
yeah. So I'm really careful with that. So I would say I think they're valid ultimately, but yeah.
Yeah, I can respect that, and I can understand that position. I just wanted to come in and share a little bit of my thoughts there. And I would also like to say this, because I saw somebody say this in the chat earlier, that that apostolic icure is Donatist. Well, I'll gladly say I'm not as ecumenist as you would be, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I love your channel. I love your cause that you fight for. But I would even say that no, it's not Donatist, right? Do I think it's a little contradictory? Yes, right? Because I think that if they took those arguments to the natural conclusion, I think that there would be a denial of the Eastern Orthodox's holy orders. But my point would be that there is even a patristic strand for them to pull on if they so chose, of somebody like Saint Cyprian, which is actually the next conversation topic that I would like to talk about, is about how Saint Cyprian was arguing that outside of the church, so in schism or in heresy, that sacraments were not valid because the sacraments belong to the church. So you could make the argument from the Roman side that it's a Saint Cyprian principle that after England, in their paradigm, schismed from Rome, that their holy orders would stop being valid. But of course, then that would also require you to say that the Eastern Orthodox's holy orders were not valid, which again they would not say. So it is contradictory, but I'm saying no, it's not Donatism. Saint Cyprian was not a Donatist, but he would not. If we assume that Saint Cyprian was a Roman Catholic, which I don't think he was, I think we can demonstrate that very clearly in his writings against Pope Stephen. But he was very clearly not a Donatist. But if we assume he was a Roman Catholic, would not have accepted Anglican holy orders.
Well, this is one of those things, man. This is I want to be a little careful to not speak too much on that which I know not. But what's interesting is I think we can see similar strands. And again, I just will continue to say this as much as I can, because I think that for anybody who really is trying to inquire about the truth of these things, I do think we always, myself included, have to constantly reflect on what is our starting epistemology and how we can interpret the past, how we can look at the past, how are we consistent about the past and coherent, but also how can we be real about the complexities of the past. And I look at something like Saint Cyprian. Obviously, we're calling him Saint Cyprian because he's a saint of the church, somebody who I'm not worthy to untie his shoes. But I also think that we have to realize that the core realities of doctrine the core reality of doctrine carry on as a seed form from the time of the apostles forward. However, doctrine does ultimately develop in our understanding of it. I would say another word we could say is it matures, right? And so just because something was espoused by somebody like Saint Cyprian 1700 years ago doesn't mean, like, people who say branch theory, for example, is like incoherent, you can't find it in the first millennium. Well, of course you're not going to find it in the first millennium in the same way. They're in a super different ecclesiological situation.
I actually do want to come back to that on the Cyprian point about branch theory, but I'll let you continue.
Yeah, please do. But that's where I would say, like, there's a stronger core that we can draw from somebody like Saint Cyprian, and still it can be interpreted in the modern world or matured in the modern world in a distinct way. Like, just in 2 seconds, one example I've used recently is like Saint Jerome's teaching on marriage, right? Like, he's much less pro-marriage than when I read like the Theology of the Body from Saint JP2. But it doesn't mean that we have to go that Saint JP2 just did a 180 from him. There's still like principles we can draw from somebody like Saint Jerome that can be efficacious for the modern man and modern, reflections. But I still think that Saint JP2's reflection is ultimately more theologically coherent. But I can say that without saying that we have to then reject Jerome. I think it's like a maturation kind of reflection. But I'd say that can be similar in some of these other questions as well.
Sure. And I mean, with my bringing up Saint Cyprian, either Pope Saint Stephen I is right or Saint Cyprian is right, right? And obviously Augustine would come along about 100 years later and would say, actually, y'all are both kind of right. So maybe they are both right. But of course, I digress. My point would be, without talking about my original point that I wanted to talk about with Saint Cyprian for now, about the branch theory thing, I actually think, contrary to many popular opinion, because Saint Cyprian writes right on the unity of the church, and it's very strong, right? He's where a lot of the super like ortho bro Eastern Orthodox pull from today, where they're like, oh no, I won't call these Oriental Orthodox martyrs because they were schismatic, right? And he has this stuff about how the schism, or about how the blood of martyrdom does not wash away the sin of schism. And he has all this stuff, so that people will say, oh, he's like very clearly ecclesialist, and he writes a lot of stuff that can be taken towards the idea of an indefectible church. But I actually find one of the strongest articulations of an early branch theory, or the seeds that would later become branch theory, in Cyprian and his companion Firmilian. Because in writing against Pope Stephen I, he says, or Saint Firmilian says, that Pope Stephen tried to excommunicate the North African bishops, or tried to exclude communion with them. But in doing so, and he tried to call them the schismatic, but in doing so, he actually makes himself out to be the schismatic. And it's only many years later that it's the schism within, right? Using this branch theory idea of a schism within rather than a schism from, but it's only many hundred years later that the schism within is healed. So it's this idea, and I would just say it like this, to paint the one-to-one picture that I'm seeing in this picture of the rebaptism controversy to the English Reformation, that there was this small area with a bunch of bishops who were theologically different than a lot of the rest of the Catholic Church at the time, and the Bishop of Rome steps in to his role that he believes that he has as Bishop of the whole Church, and he attempts to excommunicate these bishops. And in doing so, those bishops respond and say, no, we're not excommunicated because you're not doing it on just grounds. And in doing so, you've actually made yourself out to be a kind of schismatic. Now, that description that I just gave applies to, one, the rebaptism controversy in the 3rd century, but it also applies to the English Reformation in the 1600s, because it's very similar, and because we can then extrapolate that one strand or that multiple strands of branch theory that we can take and turn into what we now have as the more formulated branch theory, right? That's one of the things that I talk to people about all the time.
That's really interesting, man. Yeah, see, and this is where I would say, like, these are definitely not conversations that can just be had in like a paragraph where people are just like, oh, Saint Cyprian said this, so it's a knockout against the Anglicans. For a long time, Anglicans have believed that Saint Cyprian could absolutely be on our side with a lot of these ecclesiological questions. I'm
a big fan of Cyprian's whole ecclesiology, and even to some extent his sacramentology, but that'll be the next question.
That's fascinating, man. Yeah, again, I want to be careful on speaking too much on that which I know not, but I do think that in general we have to realize that I do think that just in general in the modern world we romanticize the past, but the past is like extremely sticky and messy in the way that I think you just espoused. What's also interesting is a lot of people, we laud Saint Cyprian, but actually I think almost none of us would agree with Saint Cyprian on the rebaptism. And I don't want to speak for you, Josh, but the rebaptism question, if I'm correct, I believe it's Saint Stephen's or Pope Stephen's position that carries the day, which is basically like, no, if you've apostatized, you can basically go to confession and be received back into the church.
Yeah, his position is essentially that those who were baptized in schismatic or heretical circles, obviously not Trinitarian heresy, because then you get into stuff about the intent, but he talks about those who are in schismatic circles that are baptized, they can be received back into the church just by confirmation and the laying on of hands. Yeah.
And so his position wins the day over Cyprian's, right? And so
in large part due to Augustine. If you read Augustine's stuff, a lot of people don't give Augustine enough credit, right? We're so caught up in his work against the Donatists and against Pelagius that we lose how he's also trying to heal the schism between Cyprian and Stephen. And when you look at his writings there, it's very fascinating. And that's where we get the distinction that we have today of validity of the sacrament and the fruit of the sacrament, right? The efficaciousness.
Yeah.
And that's where he says, if Stephen and Cyprian were with me today, that they would actually agree with me. That the heart of what Cyprian's saying is that schismatics are not saved by virtue of their baptism because they're in grave sin, right? In other words, their baptism is not made efficacious for them. And then in the case of Stephen, that there is an actual grace bestowed to them, which is the validity of the sacrament.
That's interesting. So you're saying that Augustine basically you think could have found like matching strains between both men that could have found convergence?
Yeah. So I think Augustine's position is the one that wins today. So I agree with you that generally, if we look back on that, we're going to find ourselves more in alignment with Stephen than we are with Cyprian. But Augustine comes on the scene and he basically says, no, we're using different terms. Let's instead of using two categories of validity and licitness, let's use a third category of the fruit of the sacrament. And when he introduces that third category, that's when, in large part, that whole schism gets healed in a very short amount of time.
That's fascinating to me, man. Yeah, again, honestly, and you're more learned in that specific area than I am. That sounds really fascinating to me. I think what I just see, man, is throughout history, I see this like echoed and refracted. I always point out Romans 9-11, but it's God humbles both the Jews and the Gentiles. I see this constantly happening in church history where there is this humility that comes in. I'm not saying that sometimes one side is truly just right and the other one is just wrong. Oftentimes, though, God humbles in different ways, and we see things work out in the end. I think when it comes to the English Reformation, by the way, I hope everybody watching this, and I hope you know this, Josh, no part of me is polemical towards Roman Catholicism in my heart. I do think we have to remember that prior to the Reformation, there's a whole wide array of things going on that are like very, very challenging too. So like England is put under an interdict for multiple years under the reign of King John. If you don't know what an interdict is, everybody, it's like basically the Pope saying your sacraments are not valid, like full stop, including baptisms for like years. England goes under an interdict from the Pope. It goes way back to the Synod of Whitby, and English Christianity kind of feels that there's a large influence of the continental Europe coming into England. Then you've got the investiture controversy going back and forth between the kings and the popes in the Middle Ages. There's a lot of history to it. And what's interesting is you even see this continue today, right? With like Brexit. Brexit is kind of this battle between Britain and continental Europe. So there's a lot of history there at the Reformation. Just like there's a lot of history to Cyprian when he's going back and forth with Stephen, like the North African bishops versus the bishops on the other side of the Mediterranean. So to me, even though I'm not personally learned in all the nuances, it brings humility in my mind to say, I do think there are ways we can parse through this historically. And we just have to be very cautious about how we do it. But that would be my quick reflection back.
Yeah, I think that's very, very wise. I think in large portion I would agree with basically everything you said there. I am a little bit more polemical towards Roman Catholicism than you would be, but I understand your reasons there. And maybe if you do another call-in stream, I might get in here and talk to you about that. Yeah. But I do want to bring up this again about Saint Cyprian. This is I've read most of Saint Cyprian's works in that refer to this topic, and I've read what we have of the other people that comment on this, because I just find this period in church history to be very, very, very vindicating for Anglicanism. But I want to bring this up of if I introduced if I took a random saint from the first 5 centuries of the church and I introduced him to the concept of the modern non-denominational, I'm not so sure that they would be so how should I say, optimistic about their fate, about the validity of their sacraments, right? About all of these things. And obviously I think we would be in step about, I also take the plene esse view, right? That there can be levels to ecclesial reality, but that you only have the fullness of ecclesial reality in the bishop. And I had to come to terms with that because I used to take just the plain esse view. And I had to come to grips and say, no, I think that there is more going on in a Lutheran service than there is in a megachurch non-denominational service.
Yeah.
And that's part of what made me wrestle with that. Because at the same time that I was moving towards Anglicanism quite a while ago, I have a friend who also was moving towards Lutheranism, and now we're both very firmly in our different traditions.
Mm-hmm.
But the point there is, looking at somebody like Saint Cyprian, what patristic thread would you pull on, or what theological thread in general would you pull on to have more of an optimism towards the non-denominational? That yes, they might. I can agree that they would be united to the invisible church by virtue of their baptism, but even Stephen, if he saw, I doubt that if he saw people in non-denominational churches today, I doubt that if he saw them, even if he concedes they have valid baptisms, that he would say, "Oh, yep, nope, all of them are just ignorant, and therefore they can come to heaven."
Mm-hmm. So this is where I think, again, I can only speak so far. Really, this is a question that I don't know if you agree with this, Josh. I kind of find that in theology, there are certain questions, there are different questions that trouble different people for different reasons, right?
Sure. Yeah.
When I think back historically, and maybe it's just like the way my mind was formed as a child, and then as somebody who loves history and has, kind of spent times, not as an expert on everything, but just, in different areas at different times. And I really like to reflect on sociology and historical context and these kind of things. I do think that if you just plopped a non-denominational Christian in the 4th century or the 5th century, they would be absolutely not accepted, right? But I do think that there's something to, I'm blanking on the name of who's the theologian that Gavin Ortlund loves to talk about, and Austin's talked about him. He's from the Mercersburg movement.
I'm not quite sure.
You know what I'm talking about? Anyways, he's from the Mercersburg movement, but he basically talks about how an entity can remain. So they kind of use this image of like, if you have a wooden boat and the wooden boat ends up over time having all of its planks replaced, is it still the same boat? It's like a philosophical question, but it's kind of like,
the ship of Theseus.
I think that's what you're talking about.
That's the philosophical.
Or I think that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. But I'm blanking on the Mercersburg theologian, but he's the one. He's actually I think translated a lot of the patristics and some of the post-Nicene fathers. Maybe it's the anti-Nicene fathers. But anyways, he's kind of wrestling with this question of how much so can an entity remain the same thing while also changing to its modern culture. Now, I don't think that doctrine can develop like that. Like, I do think doctrine can develop, but I don't think you can go from substantial presence in the sacrament to a total memorialist view, basically. I'm not saying I think that that's valid. But I do think it's an interesting thesis that he puts forward. So what I would say is, I think that they're in error, and I think that they're deeply in error about a lot of things. But the patristic thread that I would draw on, that I said could potentially give them mercy for that which they know not, for their true ignorance, for their invincible ignorance, let's say, for those if we're talking about how can they still participate in the church and achieve salvation, I would say it's going to be the overriding category of vincible versus invincible ignorance, right? And I would say the patristic thread, the theological grounding I would give for that would be St. Augustine's view that I talk about a lot, but that signs lead to the res. So the res is, there's only one mysterion, right? And so salvation is participation in the mysterion. So that comes in its fullness and in its assurance through the sacramental life of the visible church, right? So through the Mass. The Mass is the participation in the eschaton, in the here and now. And so from that, I would say that's the only way we can have like that's where the fullness and the full assurance can come from, is through participation in this way to the best that we can. But I do think that through baptism, and this is where valid baptism really matters, this is why there's a massive gulf between valid baptized people and people who are not validly baptized. Although I would still have hope for people that are not validly baptized based off of similar principles, but I'd say it's to a much greater degree for people who are validly baptized.
I would agree there.
Yeah. That there is a principle through which we could say, did they act on that which they knew? And therefore, through their baptisms and through some participation in ecclesial reality, again, to differing degrees, there's at least somewhat of a participation, or even though the sign is the visible church, there's still, because we make a distinction between the sign and the res, or the mysterion, the reality, there's room for participation in the res outside of the sign. And that's where I would say that through baptism, there can be mysterious participation, which still finds itself participating in the one mysterion. So I know that can be a word salad, but I actually think that that's the only theological way we can parse it out.
Yeah,
And I think I can't say that for certain, like what that means for people. It really does come to what did they know in conscience. I leave room for the mystery of God too, because I just, even my sense experience, like when I meet people, or I think of people like Gavin Ortland, and I just perceive them to be faithful in many ways. And there's a much good fruit that they're bearing. And I've spent a lot of time in those circles, and there's just a lot of like authentic Christian faith. I struggle to perceive that cannot to some degree participate in the mysterion, but how much that works and what people respond to in their conscience, I ultimately just leave that to God, while trying to still call people to what we really believe to be the fullness. So that's kind of where I leave it, bro. I'm not sure I usually go much further than that in my thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. So I have a quote from St. Augustine that I'll read just to see if this is like a kind of the point that you're trying to make. It's from letter 43. It says, "Those who defend their own opinion, although it be false and perverse, without obstinate animosity, especially if they themselves have not originated their error, but received it from parents, and are seeking the truth with careful industry, are not to be numbered among heretics."
Yeah.
Right. So he's essentially saying, and obviously he's dealing with the Donatists, right? He's saying those Donatists who are receiving this from their parents or from their culture, that they're not outright rejecting the Catholic Church as such. They're merely they're invincibly ignorant, right? That term originates with Augustine. I feel like a lot of people don't know that. A lot of Protestants today will think that term just pops up in the Second Vatican Council. I'm like, no, it's a very ancient term. It's very we should not be afraid to have this category, especially in the West, right? We are the Church of Augustine.
Yeah.
Well,
and if oh, sorry, bro. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, man. If I can quote my friend TD Barrett when we've had conversations about that, I don't want to misquote you, TD, if you ever, but I believe this is what he was saying. That's in some ways an infallible reality, that conscience and it plays a major role in how we perceive God to perceive people. So culpability does really rely a lot on what people think that they're doing. Now, where this is super careful and nuanced, though, I want to make sure I said that right. I hope what I was saying came across. But where we have to be very careful with this is people can have an uninformed conscience that then they are culpable for. So that can either be a lack of will to seek something. It can depend on one's disposition. Is it that way because of vice? Is it that way because of like an internal rejection?
This is, I think something like C.S. Lewis puts this beautifully in The Great Divorce. He has an entire dialogue there where he's like, "Do you really think that our opinions were happened upon with no fault of our own?" I had just recently reread The Great Divorce, so this was freshly on my mind.
See, so in The Great Divorce, and this is built off a whole epistemic of how even justification works. So what I would say, bro, and this would go back, I could riff here forever. I won't really do that right now, but I would say you can align St. Richard Hooker with like N.T. Wright's position, and I would say this is really alignable with just the breadth of Catholicism. I also think it's very alignable with Eastern Orthodox concepts of theosis. Is that basically how in the world can you be set right in the here and now, but also at the eschaton have to be set right by the life lived? And then that gets into our view of space and time, which I talk a lot about, but and how God's omniscience works. But what I would say is that the way N.T. Wright parses it is he says basically the way that you can be set right, but the final declaration is still based off the life lived, that seems dichotomous. He says, but the way you can bridge that gap is the Holy Spirit. And so basically, to my knowledge, the way N.T. Wright parses out this is basically you either lead a life that's saying yes to the Holy Spirit or that's saying no to the Holy Spirit ultimately. And
it's that eternal yes and that eternal no, right?
Exactly.
C.S. Lewis, he writes about, again, in The Great Divorce, he writes about how those who were in what he describes to be hell, right, if they later, and obviously he's not using this as one-to-one to what he believes the afterlife is like. He's like, those who were in hell, and then later come to heaven. He says that it would have never been anything but purgatory to them.
Yeah. Yep. And the gates of hell are locked from the inside, right? It's kind of that, it's that you're either eternally saying no to the Holy Spirit or eternally saying yes. And this fits perfectly with the concept of the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, right? The unforgivable sin. Are you either eternally saying no, or are you eternally saying yes? It makes sense in my mind of a whole like theological system. But so if that is the case, then this is where invincible ignorance becomes really important, because if you are trying in your conscience to say yes to the Holy Spirit, but you end up being wrong about something ultimately, then that's very different from being willfully wrong about something. And so in my mind, I think that kind of underpins so much of how I think about these things. So if so for example, Josh, if I right now, being the person I am with the knowledge that I have, if I just went, you know what, I believe all the things I believe, but the non-denominational church down the street has an amazing men's program and children's program, and and I'm too tired during my week to go to 2 services, so I'm just going to go to that, even though I know everything I know about the Mass and I believe all these things. I'm just going to do that anyways. That would be seriously wrong for me to do that. That doesn't mean that it's the same for people in that position who don't hold the same things I hold, right? Or even in like a closer example, I grew up in the Methodist world, and I think about all this all the time. There is no way I could go back to the Methodist church and just be at peace there, because I just could not do that theologically. I would be doing something which I thought was wrong. But I go to that Methodist church a lot, not as my main church, but you know what I mean? Like sometimes I'll go there after service or whatever, after Mass. And I just perceive people there to be acting in good faith, and I treat them as brethren who are trying to act in faith. Now, depending on the relationship I have with them, I still want to call them to the plene esse, to the fullness. But my general perception is brethren walking in the Lord. And that's just sense perception. But then so what I do is reflect on my own theological journey and try to let that kind of help frame how I even think about this. I think about my own internal mind and how I think through these questions, because I think to some degree we have to do that to parse out. So anyways, that was a word salad, but does that?
Yeah, I think that generally,
any reflections?
I think that generally makes sense. My one thing would be, I think if we are going to appeal to invincible ignorance for somebody like the non-denominational, I think to some extent that does mean that we have to say, no, you are not, you do not have the ordinary means of salvation. So that in a sense we can say you are outside of the church, right? In a real sense, even if we are still going to say, but I still do believe that you are saved because you still, right? It's this principle that Augustine says of, because I would, and I don't know if you would agree with me, and you can feel free to agree or disagree, but I do think that some of the I'll say some of the first non-denominational, some of the first extremely low church people, I am unsure about their fate because of the entire principle that they were setting forth of, and people joke about it, but they had billboards and they said, not your grandma's church, right? Which it's funny, but we can talk about what does that actually mean? What they're saying is, we're going to try to make our worship of Jesus not feel like the church. And when you do that, that is when you get into this, not necessarily schismatic, because most schismatics still have, they still have valid ordination, right? They're still a valid church, even if they're not submitted to the Catholic Church, that they would still be outside of the church in that sense. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, a couple places I would parse it out a little differently. I would say that similar to how Unitatis Redintegratio would parse it out, if they have a valid baptism. Now, I realize there are loads of baptisms that occur in those traditions that are not valid. But if they are valid, I would say that they, by default, ipso facto, are in the church to a certain degree. And that's how Unitatis Redintegratio talks about it, that they're in an imperfect relationship, imperfect communion with the church, right? So I would say that they are in the church via their baptism, but they're not participating in the full means or the full ordinary means of salvation, which does require the Eucharist, right? And the full sacramental life of the church. I would say the 7 sacraments. So
yeah, I got into a conversation with a Lutheran friend the other day about how I think that even if you define the sacraments as only those things which save, I think that you can, at the bare minimum, you can get to 6. The only one that you might have to do some work on would be the sacrament of marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can easily lay out that the other 6 do save and have a real saving effect.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and even marriage, right? If a person's single, they're still married to the church, so they sort of live a sacramental reality there too, right? But yeah, that's interesting. I would even, just for the sacraments, I won't go off on a riff here, but I would just say it's even biblically, it's extremely fitting to have 7. The whole of the scriptures are oriented off of 7s, so they're oriented off of 4s and 3s. 4 plus 3 is 7, and 4 times 3 is 12. That's how biblical numerology works. And so, anyways, I could go really in depth there, but
I wrote a paper a while back about the biblical use of the number 4.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man.
Well, and I wrote about the patristic idea of the 4 gospels, the 4 corners of the earth, all these things.
The 4 virtues, the 4 virtues of Aristotle, right? So like Saint Aquinas actually relates the 4 virtues of Aristotle plus faith, hope, and charity, the 3 Christian ones. He actually maps those onto the 7 sacraments, which is really interesting. But anyways, we could digress. That's interesting stuff. But sorry, man, I'm riffing so far. I don't even know. By the way, Second Son, I see you, brother. I'll be there here shortly. But
I'll try to stop.
No, not at all, Josh. I'm the one who can riff forever. I just want to say to people waiting, I appreciate you, man. Where was I even going with this? We were talking about non-denominational. What's interesting though, my engagement. So again, some of this is sense perception, but maybe this is my Methodist side coming out. Usually Methodists add to the 3-legged stool experience. And by that, they don't mean, whatever you feel like. They really mean what the Holy Spirit prompts in your conscience and in your soul, to fit with reason and intuition while you're interpreting scripture. But in my sense perception, when I've met with the non-denominational Christians, which I've spent a lot of time in those circles, my sense perception is like general belief that they're being faithful. I just think there's like genuine, I don't mean this to degrade, I think there's genuine ignorance about certain theological things.
I agree.
And so
I was raised in a non-denominational church, so I would say the same thing.
Yeah. And so from that, I go, this is profoundly an error, right? A lot of this stuff, but I still see real fruits of the Spirit. And so I want to be really cautious with that. So I would say that their baptism orients them towards salvation. And then I really do think, I obviously want to call all men to the fullness of the sacramental life. And I think you were very wise. I agree with you 100% that I would put Lutherans, and I'm speaking here of non-apostolic succession Lutherans, in a much higher grade than I would put a non-denominational, just in 2 seconds, if I was going to grade it, and I don't want to degrade anybody, but obviously there's the visible church of which we're a part. But then below that, I'd put non-apostolic succession Lutherans probably next. Then I'd probably put Methodists. Then I'd probably put Presbyterians, kind of near Methodists, maybe a little below. Then I'd probably put Baptists, and then I'd probably put non-denominational Christians.
Something like that, I would agree.
That's probably kind of the way I would order it. But I do believe that anybody with a valid baptism is oriented that way. I guess again, I think there is an overriding.
I would say one way to think of it is and this is actually some of the. I was very close to converting to Eastern Orthodoxy when I was first studying Anglicanism, as many people are. I share that in common with Father James.
Interesting.
From Bailey Protestant. Right?
Yeah.
He has a lot of stuff on there. His stuff actually did help me a little bit in my parsing through that. But to stop my ranting. It is like a bullseye, right? That in the center you have whatever the most true is, and then you have the second circle. So I would say in the very, very, very center, you would have Anglicanism, right? Not that Eastern Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism is not the true church, but that we are the most doctrinally pure. And obviously, we can get into our discussions there. We would have slightly differing views about how pure those communions would be. But then in the next ring, which is still the center of the target, then you have stuff like the Roman Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox. We can get into conversations about the SSPX or the True Orthodox, which I would say both of those I would be more skeptical of. But again, I digress. And then after, right, you get into the different colors, right? They have the colors on the target that you get into non-apostolic succession Lutherans, then the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and I agree with that ranking. But I like the target because it gives you that real sense
that's a
of
helpful
gradation.
image.
I also like it because it can give you a more mystic sense of the church, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, I think that's totally. I think that's a fairly fair way. I think the one place I would have a distinction, and you already noted this a little, probably that we'd probably see. I'm not sure that I would put Anglicans in a different category than Rome in the East personally. However, within the same circle, I would say that have reasons for being Anglican that I think are plene. So I do think that Anglicans try to hold the whole mirror, which to me makes it a plene. But I would still put the other pieces of the mirror in the same category. But I understand where you're going with that.
Doing that. And again, if you do another call in and I have the time, then I will gladly.
Yeah, then we'll have to keep working at that, man. But yeah, I guess so. But to me, just an overriding thing, I would say, I really like St. John Henry Newman's quip that the conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. And I do think that is a place where we, in my mind, I feel comfortable just totally saying, like, this is a mystery and I leave it to God. I will tell you, though, that in general, if I meet like a non-denominational Christian that I really believe is validly baptized and is authentically trying to follow the will of God, my general thought process is this person is oriented towards salvation. And that is different. When I look at non-Christians, I don't just like presume their condemnation. I just leave it to God totally based off of God. I don't know what they have in their conscience. I leave this to you. But I definitely want to convert those people. Whereas when it comes to like a non-denominational Christian, I'm not sure the word convert is the word I would use. I really want to get them to see the light of the fullness of the faith, but I just think about it in a very different category. So I guess that's kind of how I parse it. But again, I would agree that the full visible means of the church have to be in the full sacramental life. So, but I pray that they participate in that in different degrees, and to some degree, I leave that to God. It's very hard, right? Anyways, I just even think, just in 2 seconds, man. I went to the little history museum at my local city today with my son for his first day of homeschool, and I was thinking a lot about like the historic church presence in this large suburb I live in. And I guess just what's hard for me is I drive around and I go like, there's like 2 old little Episcopalian churches. Both of them are rural in my city. There's no ACNA churches in my city has like 500,000 people almost. There's no ACNA churches. There's no Continuum churches. There's a couple like really faithful, really vibrant Roman Catholic churches. I don't think there's one Eastern Orthodox church in my suburb. And so, but then there's like tons of Lutherans and tons of non-denoms and there's old Methodist presence. And I just can't think of those as like just not participating in the larger thing that is the Christian faith. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but sometimes I even just think pragmatically, like, what do I see around me? And it doesn't negate my theological beliefs, but it does help me. It just changes my posture about God does work mysteriously, though. And I still think he can use these for real ministry, even though I do believe very strongly that the visible church is what it is.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. Yeah, we can look at these other churches and we can say that they genuinely do participate in the church and that they still are saved and all of these things. But it is this question of, are they in the ordinary means of salvation?
Yeah,
right.
Well, and the sacraments are one of the ordinary means. So, or like they are the ordinary means themselves.
And for me, a lot of this, like a lot of my being a little bit more harsh towards non-denominationals. It just, I struggled. Now I see the patristic thread that we pull on, and obviously I would pull on it, right? That's why I've been saying, no, I don't think all non-denominationals are just damned to hell. I don't think that they're in the same category as Muslims by any means, or Mormons even. But I struggle to put away the patristic threads of Chrysostom and Cyprian saying that the blood of martyrdom does not wipe away the sin of schism and things like that, and statements of that nature that I struggle with.
That's interesting. Well, and although at the same time, I love like when Pope Francis says that the baptism by blood, right? Like there's something, that's obviously a development from the thought of some of those patristics but I would tend to agree more with the modern guys. You know what, man? I'm just going to look this up real quick. If you have any final comments, then please feel free to share them. By the way, thank you, brother. I'm going to do a lot more of these call-ins. These are really fun, by the way. I just really quick want to look up the name of this this theologian that I was mentioning earlier that Gavin Ortland and Austin Suggs have talked about quite a bit. Gavin Ortland has a really interesting. Oh, it's Philip Schaff. If anybody knows that name, Philip Schaff. So like Schaffian ways of viewing ecclesiology. I'm not saying I agree with Philip Schaff. I'm an Anglican, so we're Anglicans. So I agree with there. Yeah, I agree with the historic Catholic Church, of which I believe we're a part. However, I would say the most compelling argument for something like that, I would say, could be drawn from somebody like Philip Schaff. And I think Gavin Ortland does a pretty good job in laying out that case. Again, I would still obviously find points of disagreement, but I just want to be somewhat cautious to say in God's mystery, sometimes are things sometimes more complicated than I even may realize. Where can somebody who is objectively in error about something still be really doing God's will in a very direct way? And participating in an eschatological reality that they're not even really aware that they're a part of fully. I do think that there's potential for something like that. And so I guess I would say, for more reflection on people wondering where the other side how that could possibly look, Philip Schaff's kind of work and the Mercersburg theologians are interesting. However, I still think that Anglicans and the historic Catholic ecclesiology based around apostolic succession and the episcopate is correct.
Of course.
So yeah. So do you have any final reflections, Josh? This is great, man. Dude, you're honestly, man, I mean this so genuinely. You're brilliant, bro. I would love to chop it up more. Maybe sometime we should do a full blown dialogue, just the two of us. That'd be really cool. Maybe.
And I'd appreciate that. I actually got invited to discuss something different with a friend the other day about some shared history that we have.
Do you mind if I ask you, bro? Are you in seminary, or have you ever thought about ministry in that type of way?
I'm not currently in seminary, but I do plan on attending a seminary in just a few years.
Oh, cool.
And I plan on going and getting my my master's in divinity at Nashotah and going into full-time ministry.
Legendary, man. Do you mind, what jurisdiction are you in, bro?
I'm in the REC.
You're in the REC. Okay. Oh, so you are in the REC.
Yeah. So that's why when I was getting into some of this stuff and I was looking at some of the churches around where I live, one of the more traditional ones, one of the more obviously the more Anglo-Catholic ones that I would lean towards was REC. So I took, I don't know, probably 5 to 6 months just deep diving all of the arguments for and for not the REC's holy orders, because I was like, if this is what I'm gonna do, then I want to do it to the fullest.
Well, you got to know. Yeah, and you have to be at peace in your conscience with the orders. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, if I need to drive 30 minutes away to get to an Anglican or Episcopal church that I can, with a clean conscience, take communion at, then I'll do that. But praise God, I found this one. I'm
laughing, bro, because the church I got confirmed in was like an hour 15 away. Yep. I get it. I totally get that. Do you mind if I ask, are you East Coast or West Coast or Midwest?
I'm from the South, so I live in the like Texas, Mississippi, Georgia area.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, man, cool. I'm actually if I went to I've been to a couple REC parishes around. They're about over an hour away from where I am. They're in Bishop Sutton's diocese. I love Bishop Sutton, man. I could totally.
Sutton, have you gotten to meet him personally?
I have not. No.
He's quite a figure. He's great.
Listen, man, I'm telling you, I want to be careful because I want to truly espouse Catholicism, and I'm grateful for my bishop, and I love him. God bless him. I'm just saying, I love Bishop Sutton, man. And I've loved my engagements with Bishop Chandler Holder Jones too. We have some great bishops, man. So that's fascinating, bro. Well, dude, thanks for sharing, man. And I really appreciate you, Josh. I'll be praying for you and your parish, brother, and I hope we get to chat again sometime soon, man. So
thank you very much.
Appreciate you, bro. Have a good night, man.
You too.
God's peace, brother. Cool, man. All right. Finally, second son. I am so sorry. I know you've been waiting so long, man. I'm going to pull you up here. You there, brother?
Hey, Colin, can you hear me?
Yeah. I am so sorry, man, that it has been so long. You've just been chilling out while I'm riffing here. How you doing tonight, man?
No worries. All good. I appreciate you doing the live stream, man. It's first time ever calling in on the YouTube stream, so I appreciate you.
Yeah, it's fun, man. It's fun, bro.
Hey, I also definitely love your channel. I literally just found it not that long ago. I'm inquiring to Anglicanism. So I really appreciate like all the content that you have. found a lot of stuff really fascinating, really helpful. So definitely wanted to just give you thanks for your channel and your time.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate. I really, honestly, man, like I said earlier to Quay, I don't know if you were on the stream then. I can't really express via my face or my words, but but I actually like really appreciate that, because sometimes when you put yourself out there on YouTube, I almost didn't do YouTube for years because I don't know, I just don't like conflict. And so, anyways, it's really appreciated to hear like that. It's actually been helpful to people, and it helps me know that, you know what I mean, I'm doing something that honors God. So, which I pray is the case. So, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like even just learning from being a charitable standpoint, right, is like, I forget which video it was. It might be one of the shorts you have of like branch theory, and I think there's a couple people calling you like a heretic or like, you know, return to the one true church, and you just simply said like, hey man, God's peace to you. And I was like, that's such a good example of like trying to be in Christian charity with another brother or sister in Christ, even though we have a divide, right, on topics or something like that. So I think, you know, I think I'm learning even just from some of the comment sections, you know what I mean? So I appreciate it.
Can I hope you don't mind. I'm trying to be really real with you, man. So if I were to like fast forward, I'm 34, man. So I've been, you know, I went to seminary for over 6 years. So I've been, you know, in the theology world for a long time, and I grew up in the church. So if I were to just go back only like maybe 3 years of my life, I wouldn't even comment in other people's sections, because I was so like, I'm so conflict averse that I really didn't want somebody to like say something about me. And God's had to work on me really hard. I'm not laughing at those people, by the way. Those comments really actually pain me, but you know, God's peace to people. But dude, when I had to come to grips with the fact that I just like, if God's calling me to this, I'm careful when I say this about other Christians saying this, but it's like the Beatitudes, man. Like, blessed are you when you're persecuted. You just have to do what you believe you're called to do, no matter what people are going to say. And for me, I kind of went into this like, just saying like, I tried to hold this, not that I'm always perfect, but like, I have no will to engage in a fight with somebody or have like a real problem with somebody. And if I could just say like one thing to what you said, man, when I was actually 22, so like when I had fresh graduated from undergrad, I got a youth ministry job at a local UMC church, and the minister there was probably like my first ever like adult mentor. And he said to me, Colin, if you want to go into ministry, here's the 3 things you have to have. He said, you have to have the mind of a scholar, you have to have the heart of a child, and you have to have the hide of a rhinoceros. And I thought that's a great, and I've tried to keep that with me all the time. So I would commend that to anybody else for reflection. You got to have the mind of a scholar, you have to have the heart of a child, and the hide of a rhinoceros. And to me, like, you know, that's the way we can keep hopefully having productive conversations, where we have a backbone, but where we also, you know what I mean, try to really like not just push forward tribalism, but push forward like actual ability to converge and to find points of charity, you know, so we can really work at things. So
yeah, man, that's awesome. I definitely appreciate sharing that too, because I think that's a good thing for like myself to reflect on yeah, like trying to figure out what it means to you know, be more active in the church, be more like charitable and hospitable people, and being able to, I think, take the flack, you know what I mean, to
yeah,
for someone that may not agree with you, either, you know, either a believer or someone who isn't a believer. I think sometimes there's more of a I think there's more of a chance for someone to get flack or maybe get some pushback from someone within the church rather than without the church, right? Like at the last church I was at did a study, and 51% of the church congregation said that church hurt came from Christians, not from someone outside the faith. So I was like, oh, like there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot to like learn on how do you continue loving someone and see them as an equal, even though you may have a difference of opinion on something, you know what I mean?
Yeah, bro. Yeah, I want to be careful with. I always want to be careful with what I say. You know, I just want to make sure it comes off the right way, like whatever I say. But if I am having like, if I make a video on like, you know, the teleological argument or something like that, if an atheist comes in the comment section and just starts talking, of course, like you want to be charitable and you still want to like engage with them in good faith and all these kind of things. but it doesn't really bother, at least like somebody like me, it doesn't really like bother my conscience. You know what I mean? Like it makes me sad, you know what I mean? Kind of like where they're at, but it's different when it's somebody who's a brother in the Lord. And so like it's almost like to some degree, the closer people are to you, more that the fact when you're not able to like figure stuff out, the more hard it actually is. I don't know if any of you guys, it's interesting. I actually found this different with different people in real life. To make it like a relational example, sometimes people, as somebody who's been married for over 10 years, some people think that deeper pain in life comes from like people that you don't know. But for me, I've always had more struggle with the challenges that I have with people with whom I have expectations of within my close circle. And so that's an interesting disposition. Some people I think are in different dispositions, but I would be in agreement with you on that. Like, so if I were to open that up to the church, when Christians disagree, it's actually a lot more painful and hard to deal with. And, you know, and that's something that I think we all have to reckon with. Like, I can tell you as somebody who like thought of going into ministry and still, you know, obviously still thinks about it. And when I say ministry, I mean, like, hopefully I'm already doing that, but hopefully we all are, but I mean, in like ordained sense, it's pretty tough, man, to be a pastor or to be a priest and to have people like do what they do in the local church. Do you know what I mean? Like you give your whole life to your flock, to God and to what God's calling you to, and then you pour yourself out for the flock. And when you just take so much flack back, like that's really painful, you know? And it's a lot more painful than if you work at a secular job and, you know, your coworkers disagree with you. Like that's much more easy to deal with. But yeah, you know, it's something I think we all have to reflect on in a really deep way.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. I'm going through a book right now just for for fun, but also for like edification. It's you may have heard of it. It's called Persevere in Love.
I don't know if I have, man.
I can't remember the author's first name, but it's Harding, I think is the last name, and the subtitle is Meditations on the Ministerial Priesthood from the Anglican Tradition. And there's a whole chapter in there where he's talking. I think it's actually a collection of essays, but I think it's edited by the author. And there's a chapter in there where it's literally talking about verbatim of like the priest has a self-giving, has to persevere in love to the flock, even though he must endure hostility and rejection and persecution from his own parish. At the same time, is continually he quotes Austin Farrar as another Anglican theologian say the priest is a walking sacrament. And in order to do that, right, in order to suffer hostility from your own parish and parishioners, and to still be a walking sacrament, to point people to the eternal glory of Christ, you have to be able to endure that suffering. And makes you question, like, what's my purpose as a priest? Is it worth it? What am I doing here? And he kind of talks about some of the I haven't gotten to it just yet. I'm finishing up that chapter, but I think he's going to talk about kind of like, I think maybe encouragement for someone who is doing ministry, and not necessarily like, this is related to the priesthood, but not necessarily just the priest, right? Like someone who is doing ministry, like they have to, like you said, like have that rhino skin in order to like, can we still point people to Christ, even though that your own close circle may at some point, you know, be hostile or push back or whatever it may be. So it's really good to kind of like think about that as you like try and like I think it's navigate the choppy waters, right, of putting the stuff out there and just willing to take the feedback from it, whether good or bad. Like I think it's all good because it definitely builds you, like, and you know, at least helps me to learn another person's perspective to say, I can see how you got there. I think I think you may be wrong, I may be wrong, whatever it might be, but I at least can appreciate their perspective, and then like, hey, can we work towards a common good of like, well, what is biblical truth, and then, you know, can we, even if we agree to disagree, like, can we still, like, my biggest thing is like, can we still worship together, right? Like, that's I think that's something I appreciate about the Anglican tradition. Learning about it is like, I guess the terminology of the big tent mindset of like, yeah, like you may be, you know, super high on one side, super low on the other side, you know, but can we pray together, right? Can we worship together? And I think that's like a really cool aspect of Anglicanism that I really like, is we can be on opposite aisles, so to speak, but we can still be in lockstep on the realities of the liturgy, and then pointing us to Christ. And the question I wanted to kind of pick your brain on, man, on kind of that mindset of like, can I have enough charity and graciousness to someone to say like, man, you and I are completely different opposite, but like, can we still worship together? I had a buddy of mine pose a question to me that I never thought about. It's a philosophical question, and I have like no like training in philosophy, but I think it was very similar, I think, to I think it was yourself, and oh my goodness, I think it was the gentleman from Saints and Segueros.
Alex
Yeah,
is so cool, man. People should check out his channel, Saints and Segueros.
Yeah. I think you guys were, talking about, I can't remember 100%. I think you guys were kind of dipping into like free will and sovereignty and kind of stuff like that. And one of my buddies posed a philosophical question to me that I thought was really interesting that I just hadn't thought about, and love to get your take on it if you have any viewpoint on it. But essentially, the argument was he kind of started off asking me, hey, like, you believe in free will? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, so God will not violate your free will because he wants your love in return. I said, yeah, like I don't think like God is going to create automatons, like kind of like the C.S. Lewis mindset, right? Like God wants us to be able to freely love him, and that like that free love is truly like pure love. It's not deterministic or being caused in some external fashion, right? Like we can freely love God, and he can freely love us. And I said, yeah. So he says, okay. And this is essentially I think a perseverance of the saints maybe question, but the way he framed it was, okay, so we can freely love God, he can freely love us, and we can choose him without violating our free will. So when we get to eternity and the glorification happens, right, the beatific vision happens, we our free will won't be violated, but in some way, shape, or form, we are transformed into being in union with God, and we won't apostatize like from God at that point. I said, yeah, I think that, like we don't think anyone's going to leave Christ once, they've been glorified, right? The resurrection. And his point was emphasizing, okay, so our free will isn't violated at that point, but there is some type of change or some type of thing happening where we will never leave Christ at that point. I said, yeah. He said, okay. So if our free will isn't going to be violated in eternity and glory, then what stops God from not violating our free will on this side of eternity and putting basically everything in front of the person for their free will to choose the good, to choose the divine, choose him, and allow them to persevere and never fall away? So if it's going to happen in eternity, what stops him from being able to do that on this side of eternity? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I've exactly thought about it that way. Do you mind if I wanted to give a quick reflection on the first point you were making? Do you mind if I do that and then reflect on this question? Or would you rather I did in vice versa order?
No, yeah, whatever you prefer, man.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I had a reflection that I wanted to share on the first part because I think it's really I just think it's really hopefully efficacious, and I just feel kind of led to say it. And then I'll get specifically to the second question, which that is a really interesting question. So to the first question, when we were talking about just kind of how do you deal with flack in the Christian world and why that's painful, and how should we think about that theologically? There's a comment. I don't know if you know the Reformed Pastor's YouTube channel, Pastor Daniel, but he made a comment. He's British. He made a comment the other day that I thought was very apropos. He said that looking for affirmation in the comment section is like looking for gummy bears in the toilet. I thought that was an amazing line. Looking for affirmation in the comment section is like looking for gummy bears in the toilet. Man, when I think of the life of Jesus, and I think about how Jesus actually related to people and to persecution and to struggle, even from his own people, even from people who were people of God, children of God. I think it really does paint a picture for us. And so what I think about, and I want to be careful here, I'm not like making myself out to be like, there are people who are actually martyred, and obviously like it looks different for every person. And to some degree, every Christian, this is partially what it means to take up your cross. We all have to bear some level of struggle, just like our Lord did, right? Like it might be in different shades, and I'm not saying they're all exactly the same. But when I think of like, how Christianity sometimes works, and I think this is absolutely perpetuated online. The image that comes to mind for me, man, is the image of like Palm Sunday leading up through the crucifixion. So Jesus rides into Jerusalem, and at first, when people think that he's on their team, they're like, rah, rah, yay, Jesus, Hosanna, like go and overthrow the Romans. There's your double entendre for today. And then Jesus ends up saying, actually, guys, this is not the way. The way to life is actually, I'm going to go to the cross and I'm going to die because I love the Romans and I love you. And they don't like that, man. And they turn on him and they betray him ultimately. And he's alone, obviously the Father and the Spirit are with the Son. The Blessed Virgin is there with him. St. John's at his side, the other women. But he's pretty isolated, right? Aside from obviously the love of the Godhead. And I think that is part of the Christian life, is death. And part of what I think makes Anglicanism attractive is not that I think it's better than other Christian groups. And a lot of Anglicans will push back on me for this, sometimes really strongly. Arthur Michael Ramsey, when he was painting what Anglicanism was, is he basically painted it as a cruciform tradition that I'll just quote this really quickly. I think this is the only possible coherent view of Anglicanism. So if somebody's going to be an Anglican, in my view, this is the only way to be a coherent Anglican. Is he says, while the Anglican Church is vindicated by its place while the Anglican Church is vindicated by its place in history through a strikingly balanced witness to the gospel, to the church, and to sound learning. So he's saying, yes, we have valid holy orders. We can make all these arguments. He says its greater vindication lies in pointing through its own history to something of which it is a fragment. Its credentials are its incompleteness, with tension and travail in its soul. And he says it is clumsy and untidy, and it baffles neatness and logic. For it is sent, quote, not to commend itself as the best type of Christianity, but rather through its very brokenness to point to the universal church wherein all have died. And basically what he's saying there is Anglicanism's vocation is death. And it's not death because we want to lose our heritage, or because we don't think it's important, or because we want to capitulate on every doctrine that we ever stood for. But it's death so that new life can come. And so our tradition in its very life tries to live a cruciform life, which reaches at one hand out in one way and one hand out the other way. So in a sense, we stand at the bridge of East and West. In a sense, we stand at a bridge between the Reformation and the Latin Church. In a sense, we stand at a bridge between the evangelicals and sacramental theology. We kind of stand at this very cruciform place where we reach out in both angles. And in a sense, our vocation is to die so that a greater eschatological reality can come, and that our witness would play a role in that, albeit not the whole of it. But it's still a very distinct and important vocation within the larger Christendom. And in my mind, this fits beautifully with the scriptural passage where Jesus says, unless a single grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, then it can bear much fruit. And it's like the only way to life is through death. This is why, like Jesus, like when Peter wants to find a different way from death, Jesus, get behind me, Peter, because I have to go to the cross. That's the only way to life. And in a sense, like we want to live in an ecclesial world where we can avoid death and we can avoid pain and the struggle. We want Cartesian certainty. We want everything to be nice and pretty and coherent. And sometimes it's more messy than that. And so I guess I'm just saying, the way that I deal with that. And then, so I think of, to get to a more specific, so that's one thing I would say. It's not Anglican in saying that it's the best, but that's actually our place from my view, from Michael Ramsey's view, within the larger Christian world. I think it's the only coherent position that Anglicanism can really claim to. But then beyond that, on a personal note, when you brought up about like pastors pouring themselves out, I even think about this, and again, I'm not saying it's different for different people, and some people, obviously some people literally shed their blood, or, you know, they have very hard circumstances. I've been blessed to not have like crazy hard circumstances. But I do think, like on YouTube like this, for example, I pour myself out in videos, right? And I'm very like vulnerable with my life, and I'm vulnerable with my theology. And it's not always received like it's not always received in the way that we envision it, what we want it to be. I heard it said once, like, sometimes people go into ministry thinking that you're going to be like Solomon, like dispensing your pearls of wisdom, and everybody's just going to soak them up and say like, yeah, this is great. That's not really how ministry works. Really, people like oftentimes trample on them, and they trample on you, and you have to stay calm yourself and peaceful. You're pouring yourself out like a libation, to use St. Paul's language. You pour yourself out as a libation. Sometimes you get no TLC in return, and yet you still have to be, if you're going to be, I think, a faithful Christian teacher, you have to continuously be playing like you have to be on the right side of everything. So like in the comment section, even like somebody says something nasty to me, I don't think I have a right to say something nasty back. I have to keep pouring myself out, even though I may not get it in return. To me, like the model that we're meant to follow as Christians. And I guess just last point on this, what's interesting, do you notice, man, this pattern of Jesus? I've actually been reflecting on this, and this is not to dunk on any other Christian YouTubers or things like this. It's really not. I want to call all Christians to reflect on this. There is this notion out there right now that like when people hit you with fire, so like if an ortho bro hits you with fire, you hit them back with fire. Or like if a trad Roman Catholic comes on a comment section and calls you a heretic, like you rip them one in the comments or something. Like there's so much of that going on. I really struggle how people actually reconcile that with the way of Jesus. I know sometimes they'll quote like Proverbs and they'll say like, well, you answer this person according to their folly, stuff like that. I don't think that's actually applicable in these situations. I think actually applicable is the Beatitudes, where they ask you to go 1 mile, you go 2. You turn the other cheek when they hit you, right? You forgive not only 7 times, but 70 times 7, to quote, that's reflecting back on Cain and Abel. There's this notion in which like, the way you actually win is not through domination and return, but we win by love and charity. And so I guess I would just say that sometimes when people will dunk on like me or other people in the comments, sometimes people think it's weak and that you lose if you like engage back by just being peaceful and calm. But actually, in the end, that's actually how the Christian church prevails. That's how real winning happens. It's through death to self so that new life can come. And so I guess I would just point that out as an overall reflection. Now, to your second point, to the second question, and thanks for letting me do this, bro. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not rambling too long. But so to the second point, man, to your question about free will, and how I think I know what you're saying, that like the second question you're bringing up does lead to some sense to the question of purgatory, and how can one go from an imperfect state to a perfect glorified state, right? That's the question of purgatory, and how do you actually reflect the triune God when you believe that grace can be cooperated with, which I would hold to as well. Now, if we're going to say, why would God allow a sense of like a sped up glorification potentially, once one passes from this earth unto glorification, but he didn't allow that in the same way beforehand? I think my initial reflection would be that he wants hearts that are oriented towards him. So I guess that would be the overarching word I would use to answer the philosophical question you asked, is the orientation of the will. So I even say this as a parent of 5 children. It's not always that you want your kids to do the right thing. I do want them to do the right thing. I want their will to be oriented towards doing the right thing. And so I think that part of the project of humanity in our real universe is about our hearts turning to God. It's about having a heart of flesh that's oriented towards God. So it's kind of like, even like David, right? David has a heart that's oriented towards God, even in his sin and in his errors. And I think God wants a heart that's after him. And so I do think that the project of reality in life and the cosmos lends itself towards an ability to choose an orientation towards God. And so unlike the analogy I always use, just I'll end with it. It's a funny analogy, but I actually think it's very similar to C.S. Lewis's analogy. It's like an AI girlfriend versus like a real relationship. An AI girlfriend will never be real. There will never be an orientation towards you. It's a computer, right? It's a computation. It's not a conscience. Marriage is like a billion times harder than that, and relationships are, but there's still an orientation towards the other person that really defines love. And love is, God is love. And so to reflect God, we need to be oriented towards him. And so the project of real humanity allows that orientation. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on any of those things, bro? So I hope I didn't go on too long, man. That was a long riff, but
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think on the, I don't know if it's maybe a direct comparison of what you mentioned previously on the first point, but when you were talking about like the purpose of death is sprouting new life, like that. What made me think about was I think it's in the same book by Bishop Ramsey, the Anglican Spirit, where he's talking. He quotes William Temple.
yes,
and he was saying, and I'll probably butcher it, but I read, I guess the paraphrase I was thinking on for a while after reading that was like William Temple saying, in his time, right, in the context where Christian social activism was like kind of like the way to show like sanctification, right, or like to show like the fruits of the Spirit was like serving your neighbor physically. And I like what he had said was, it's often said that conduct is of chief importance and worship helps it, but the truth is worship is of chief importance and conduct tests it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about that of like, if your worship towards God is oriented, through contrition and repentance and love and charity, like your conduct should reflect that. It should exude it and be the result of it, if your love for Christ is genuine. And to your point of like being able to reflect on the death of Christ and the suffering on it, and his passion and everything, I think to me, I don't know if you've ever read the Spirituality of the Cross by Gene Veith.
No, I haven't.
It's a real, like, it's one of the like really cool, impactful books. That's like a really easy read. He's a Lutheran layman, but he's written a number of books. But the Spirituality of the Cross is like such a good read because, again, from like the Lutheran perspective, at least from my understanding of being really to emphasize the carrying of our sorrows in his body, to really reflect on that and to say the hardships, the persecutions, the antagonizers, right? Like your persecutors, how much more magnified was that for Christ carrying all of that from the world, not just individually, right, but for humanity collective, and to say that our sorrows were born in his body on the cross, right, to finish that work for us and to overcome that for us, to help kind of like give the ease of conscience, right? Because I'm learning about having assurance of salvation in effectual signs and tokens through baptism and the Eucharist, to say like in the moment you receive it, like you have assurance because it's God's promise given to you, and God doesn't fail in his promises. And to take that and to reflect on it and say, if you have burdens and sorrows and you struggle for love, and to recognize like the love poured out for us through Christ and his body, the piercing of his side, and to have be a curse for us, right, as Paul says, like to reflect on that gift and that goodness, to say like, if I've been given of my trespasses in Matthew 6, right, I can also forgive my trespassers. And I think it helps kind of quench that desire to like just smack the person back. Like if they're saying something crazy. So those the two books just kind of came to mind when we were talking about the first point there, which I appreciate you sharing, because I think it is a really good picture. Something my wife had asked me, because I'm also 34. I got 4 kids.
Oh, God bless.
Yeah, trying to move towards something that's completely different. Come from a Calvary Chapel background, unknown background. We're in an EFCA, evangelical free church at the moment, but moving towards a more apostolic tradition. My wife is asking like, hey, like why why this, right? And I basically told her what you had so beautifully broken down of Bishop Ramsey's explanation of being that kind of in between of the way I explained to her from my understanding of the reading of it was like, I really appreciate the fact that we're all, unfortunately, on this side of eternity, we're broken shards of the mirror, and we're calling all the shards back to being a full mirror. And that he says like Anglicanism is an unfortunate label that we have to take amidst our brokenness, but if we can be a church that God will use to bring the pieces of the mirror back together, then we would rather not have Anglicanism as a label at all. We would rather just have the one Catholic body. And that really resonated with me of like, I want to be able to worship with people, and I want to be able to be ecumenical with them, and not obviously affirm like falsities or something like that, but to have the heart of saying like, man, like if we both love Christ, can we work together to put the mirror back together? And that was such like a beautiful take. Because a lot of times in different readings and different conversations, it's very much like well, we're right, they're wrong, Lord's mercy on them, right? Like they'll figure it out that they're wrong. So and it's like, well, definitely there can be some hard lines in the sand, but on a general principle, I just really resonated with the fact that if that's the Anglican spirit, like that's something I could get behind, something I could raise my children in, to say like, this is our goal, right? Like to call not only those who are far off, that are outside the body, but those who are in the body also call to unity. Like it was such a beautiful picture that I really appreciated. Like that mindset was really cool to read. So that was a great book. But I guess on the free will aspect of it, do you just out of curiosity, like do you think there's a difference between like on this side of eternity versus if there is some type of post-mortem mortification or purification, or whatever the transformation may be, do you think that on both this side of eternity and also in heaven, right, like we I guess still have a sense of true agency for like libertarian free will, that we could, like, how do I put it? Like even in heaven, after getting their glorified body, we still have agency and libertarian free will to reject God even in heaven at that point, but we won't, because like as you said, our hearts and our wills are continually moving toward him, and we wouldn't essentially want to move away from him. Like the way I was trying to explain it to my buddy was like, I don't know the philosophical way to explain it, but it was like when St. Aquinas was saying like, we either have inordinate conversion or inordinate aversion, right? And so like the mortal venial distinction. So like I think in eternity and after glorification and whatever that process is, I think we no longer are going to have either of those inordinate aversion or conversions, right? The focus on the away for something that's venial, or to completely break away from God for aversion, right? Complete separation. I don't think that our wills will be oriented in any of those ways. I think concupiscence will essentially be eradicated as well at that point. That would keep us from doing either of those two things. Because it would be like, I think you've talked about in the past, like that would be like at the point where old creation is made new creation, right? And that restoration happens. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I don't know how to formulate a question there, but that's just kind of my thought.
You're much more philosophically learned than you're giving yourself credit for, man. You're asking really great questions. I mean that so sincerely, bro. Real quick, so I'm going to do the same thing at this school. I'm going to answer your first part, and then I'll reflect on the second part.
Cool.
First off, I just have to state how cool that is that you've read The Anglican Spirit by Arthur Michael Rand. So, did you hear about that from my channel, or did you find that from another source? I'm curious.
No, I think I snagged it from your channel on either a short or I think one of the maybe long form videos you had, where I think I just had like literally 10 seconds listening to it on a car ride, and I was like, that sounds interesting. And I think that's where I ended up picking up from. So I would say I'm gonna give you credit, because I think that's the only place I can remember hearing it from.
I don't need the credit, man. I mean, it's to God's glory. What did you think, real quick, what did you think about that book, man? That book, my mentor, when I moved into Anglicanism, had my mentor for which was my priest, at the church I got confirmed at, had me read that book, and I was blown away by the profundity and the depth of it. Even though it's a short, it's an approachable book. What was your reflection on it, man? I'm curious.
Oh, it was great. I literally, as soon as I got it, I think I read it straight through in like 3 days. It's not, you said, not a long book, but like just because of schedule and work and stuff like that. And again, having 4 kids, like running the household, it's like,
you read it faster than me.
Yeah, I read it, I think, within like 3 days, and I was like, man, this is something I'm gonna have to like read and reread, just like To Persevere in Love. But it's Leander Harding is the author's name.
That's fast. That sounds like such an interesting book, man.
It's crazy. It's really good. You should check it out.
There's so many. When you realize the depth and the richness of Christian material, it actually boggles the mind. So the Anglican Spirit's a really phenomenal read. And I too am very struck by how he ends it. But I just wanted to point that out, how cool that is that you've read that. I've met very few people that really understand it. I want to do like a real deep dive on it. And it's all, and you could see how it's really, I hope one of my goals is to aim to espouse the spirit which he's talking about, because it's really right about the development of how English Christians have thought over the last 200 years, and why they think the way they do today, and why they interact with other Christians the way they do. It's really fascinating. But you know what, man? If I could quote one other book that I had to read for seminary, to the first point, it's not actually an explicitly Christian book. The purpose of it is very Christian. So I'm trying to be leery of the divide between this is Christian and this is secular. Like, if something honors God, it can still be Christian, But we read a book in seminary called The Anatomy of Peace. I don't know if anybody's ever read that or heard of that before. But it's all about a premise of, it's a fictional story, but it's about a father and a son who basically go to like a counseling kind of camp, although they meet separately, like with separate groups. And the son in this fictional story has a drug addiction problem, and the father is going and meeting with other parents of other children who have drug addiction problems. And the father basically goes into it with this concept of like, how am I going to fix my son and his problem? And how can I learn, tools to how to deal with him and his problem? And the whole premise of the book is about learning that although, of course, the son had things he needed to change, the father needed to change too. And in this fictional story, there were 2 men who so basically the whole book, it doesn't really talk about the son that much. It's mostly about the father meeting with the other parents of the children who have drug addiction problems. And the 2 men leading the class, again, this is all fictional. One of them, it comes out, is a Palestinian Arab, and the other one is a Jewish person. And they basically talk about how they grew up with just inbred hatred of the other. And the whole premise of the book is that basically with every single choice that you make, you can either approach it with a heart of peace or with a heart of war. That's the whole premise of the book. And he even has like the father like recollects back on his childhood. He gives this one image that it really speaks out to me as a father, where he said that one day, again, this is all fictional, but it's really interesting. He said one day when he was a child, he was recollecting, and when he was a young boy, and his father had been saving up at like blue collar job for a very, very long time to basically buy a new truck for the family. And he said that right after the father bought the truck, he gave him as his son the keys to go out and take the truck out into town. And basically the son like drowned the truck in the lake.
Oh.
And you can imagine, like, he said that when he went back to talk to his father, he was unimaginably terrified of how angry the father was going to be at him. And in the story, he said that his father never even removed the newspaper from his face when he broke the news, standing there at the doorway, trembling in his boots. But he just said, his father, just with the newspaper in his face, very calmly said, well, I guess we're going to have to take the other truck then. And he speaks of it for anybody who's had a similar reflection. The point is there are some moments in life where when we receive an enormous amount of grace that we realize we don't necessarily deserve, it really does hit us at our core. And sometimes those memories go back to childhood. And the point is that it ends up refraining his brain to learn what it means to have a heart of peace towards his son. And so, anyways, I bring up all of that to say, sometimes we have to reflect on the mercy we received, like you pointed out. We have to reflect on the grace God has given us for some things we've gotten wrong. It paints a disposition within our heart towards the other. And it helps, it just paints a different posture for how we approach questions, and we approach them with a heart of peace rather than with a heart of war. And just everything that I know about Christianity says that is the way. I'm going to quote Mandalorian here. I've been watching that series recently. This is the way, right? This is the way of peace, the way of beating your swords into plowshares, the way of not reacting to comments when they're nasty, right? Or not even nasty, but even when they're just kind of, even when they hurt, or a little presumptuous, we react with peace. We react with charity. We react with real peace and charity, right? And with an actual disposition to love that person and to try and understand where they're coming from and why they may have a different view. And even if we think they're erroneous, or if they're not being very kind, we can still have a disposition towards peace. And when that's our overriding disposition, I think that is the way towards actual healing. And so we want to do that both individually and as ecclesial bodies. And so, anyways, I guess I'll stop there. One interesting part from I don't know if you remember this, I think it was William Temple, who he was such a synthesizer of, and by the way, for those who don't know, he was the Archbishop of Canterbury during World War II, or at least like leading up to it. I was during World War II. He had this great line where he used to meet with Christians from different denominations. And I think one time he came out and he said there was something about like a Lutheran had a different perception. And he comes out, and rather than saying like, well, we'll never get along, he says, we've got a lot to synthesize here, guys. And it's a different kind of disposition that believes that the divine logos can bring points of convergence, even if some things are ipso facto wrong. God can still bring a good principle from them or a truth from them. And so, anyways, that's interesting.
Yeah,
and then,
that's a really, sorry, that was such a good point. That's one of the things I really loved about, I think, learning about Bishop Temple too, was like that exact point. There's a Lutheran, I think there was a Roman Catholic, and I think there was someone else, maybe another like Protestant. And I think if I remember correctly, like exactly what you said, he's like, oh, that conference happened, that talk happened, and everyone kind of mumbled as they were leaving the auditorium, like, how is this ever going to work? And then Bishop Temple literally stayed up all night and came up the next morning out of nowhere with like a stack of papers on how they can make it work together.
Yeah. Isn't that great, bro? And so I love that, man. And so the whole premise of that book is that's how I realize Anglicanism is a broad tradition, but that in my heart is what like the core of Anglicanism is, and how it relates to other Christian bodies, and even how we engage in theology. Oh, I know one other point I wanted to say with that, and this gets to the second question as well, so it kind of will overlap with both. One thing that's been helpful for me, and I'm indebted to N.T. Wright with this type of thinking, but really it's Pauline theology that he's just articulating in a way that made sense to me as I'm still growing into maturity theologically, is he says that what theology is basically at its very core, from Pauline teaching from scripture, is theology is thinking into the mind of God. So theology and learning theology is learning to think how God wants us to think, right? So it's not so much about being I do believe it's ultimately right, but my point is it's not just about having a proper systematic. It's about learning how to actually think the way in which God wants you to think. It's about having a conscience and a mind that is formed by the mind of God. And just in my mind, I can't possibly perceive a world where and if I'm wrong, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I really would be missing something. I believe I would be invincibly ignorant. I don't perceive that in the end it's going to be this side was all wrong and this side was all right. I don't think that's quite, I don't really think that's how it's going to work. I don't think God's going to look and go like, oh, the East was right, the whole West is schismatic. And so all the extraordinary things that have happened in Western Christendom, we can just discount them. But I also don't think it's just going to be that the East was totally wrong at the Great Schism. And I think that's true for most problems in church history, that it's not that everybody's 50-50 and let's just be pluralistic, but it's that it's far more nuanced and complicated. And we have to be very careful and we have to have a posture of humility and of peace when we approach these things. And in my mind, that is just inherently the way that I see God working. Like I think that's the way that God thinks. Like in 2 seconds, if I was going to break down Romans, I've done this many times, but just in 2 seconds, I think N.T. Wright is correct. The Christian life is about being set right so that you can be a right setter for God's world. And I think even the whole book of Romans and really the whole New Testament is basically espousing that point. Like, so Romans 1-8, 1-5, all people are sinners in need of forgiveness. Romans 6, 7, and 8 is the new Exodus, baptism. Why do I do the thing I don't want to do? The wilderness wandering, and then the new creation. So we're set right through the new Exodus, delivery from slavery to sin. But that occurs so we can accomplish what's in 9-16, which is the unity of the church, which is a microcosm of harmony, of shalom that God wants to bring for all of the cosmos. And so like 9-11 is about how God humbles the Jews and the Gentiles so that neither of them boast, but they both needed something from the other. God humbles them. And then 12-16, so that there can be pragmatic unity in the church in Rome. It's like a microcosm of the Christian life and of the gospel. We're set right so we can be right setters. And so that whole disposition, though, is oriented off of knowing that God has forgiven you. He's delivered you through a new Exodus. We are meant to be humbled and learn from our brother. The whole of the scriptures is about learning from your brothers and about brothers reconciling in so many ways. And then it's so we can be a united community and be a microcosm that eventually grows into until the whole cosmos is flooded with this overflowing water. It's like the image from Ezekiel's temple. Like water trickles east out of the temple, but then it eventually starts like it's knee deep, and then it's waist deep, and then it's shoulder deep, and then it goes and floods into the Jordan River. Eventually it brings life to the Dead Sea, and then eventually the entire cosmos is flooded with this water trickling from the temple. That's the Christian gospel, right? That right so that we can be a microcosm, and then that grows and flowers into touching all of creation. So that's what I think God's doing. And then how that overlaps with the second point. You see, man, I do think that there's a sense in which our image bearingness, which entails the ability to love, and I would say that to love, there has to be free choice. So again, I actually think the AI example is a really good example. Like an AI relationship is never ever real, right? It's like me trying to have a relationship with this chair, ultimately, like it's not a real, there's no real cooperation that's exists at all. And so I don't think that in eternity we'll lose the ability to truly cooperate with. And I think we have, examples in our life of people who, I do believe Jesus was fully human and fully divine, right? And Jesus still remained completely sinless, of course. I believe in the sinlessness of the Blessed Virgin Mary as well. But I still believe that like her fiat was real, her acceptance of Gabriel's message. And so, so there can still be autonomous choice without sin, or excuse me, not autonomous choice. There can be freely chosen cooperation without sin, right? So it's definitely possible. And then I guess just where that would come into play for me, though, like what do we do in this life in the midst of that? I grew up in the Wesleyan tradition, man, and one of the doctrines in Wesleyanism, which is really, I would say, just a Catholic teaching in general, is the doctrine of Christian perfection. And it's something that's deeply misunderstood, but it basically says that like in this life, we should aim to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. And that what that does not mean is sinlessness. It doesn't mean that we think we'll achieve sinlessness before glorification, but it does mean that we think that we should we should strive after an orientation of the heart that is oriented towards the will of God. And that is something like, to be a Methodist minister, you have to say, I expect to achieve this in life. Now, what's interesting is even John Wesley didn't think he achieved that in his life necessarily, but it's all about in my heart, it's about the orientation of our life toward God. And I could go off on a really big riff with that. I won't go too far, but it even goes into, for example, just in 2 seconds, this is a real wrench, but I'll throw a wrench in here. But like in 1 John, right? In 1 John, it literally says the Christian cannot sin. But then at the same time, it also says, if you say you have no sin, you're a liar and the truth's not in you. And it's like, okay, how do I put those two things together? And the only way I know how to do it is kind of how I believe Wesley would have, which is it's about the orientation of your heart. So a true Christian still has actual sin, but their orientation should still be towards the will of God. So it almost, in a sense, it doesn't become actually impossible, but it's almost, you would cease to be who you are if you did that which you knew in your conscience to be so repugnant that it would be like almost like a minor apostasy. So like, if I could just give one example, like this is a personal reflection, and this is kind of how Wesleyan theology works within Anglicanism, is in a sense, it's a reflection upon the moral life that we hold ourselves in the moral life of humanity, and tries to like parse it out and then align it and cohere it with Christian doctrine and with scriptural reality. But like one example I would give, and I want to be very careful I say this because I don't want people to hear me wrong. Okay. Like, I have the free will to leave from this live stream and go cheat on my wife, right? Like I definitely have the freedom to do that. Honestly, in my conscience, the moon would turn into cheese before I would ever do that. And I really believe I can say that with boldness in my heart, because I know in my conscience that if I did that, I would cease to be Colin. Like I literally would not even be who I am anymore. And so I have the theoretical freedom to do that, but it would be so gravely repugnant. I would basically be like apostasy for me to do that. Or another even more minor example, like I have the free will right now on this camera to just say bad language. But I just it really feels impossible for me to do that in another sense, because I just I'm thinking, if anybody knows, I know he's a Presbyterian guy, but if anybody knows who's Bobby Schuller, he said one time on one of his sermons, he said, I could think of like 10 or 20 words I could say right now that would forever end my public ministry, forever. Just saying one word. And it's like, people can have freedom to do something, but that thing that you have freedom to do can be so repugnant to who you become that doing it would almost be like apostasy from who you are. And I think that those categories will carry into the new creation, where it's like, of course, we still have our cooperation with grace, but we've been so perfected in love through glorification that those things basically are impossible, even though they're theoretically possible. If that makes any sense, man. And I can hold that to be true without thinking that if somebody else uses bad language, for example, I'm not saying that they're apostatizing. They may be in a different place in their conscience than me, if that makes sense. But I think that's a way that I think the Wesleyan mind is correct, and kind of how it parses out that distinction between people they do have actual sins in all sorts of ways, but real Christianity still should cause our heart to be oriented towards God, such that doing against which is blatantly really grave and repugnant almost becomes it feels impossible, I think, to a certain degree. I don't know what your reflections are on that, man. That's a really deep reflection on moral reality. But
no, I appreciate you sharing that, 'cause I think that gives me a lot to think on and chew on, kind of maybe how it relates to maybe some of the categories you just mentioned, because I haven't necessarily thought about it in that way. So that's a really cool new angle, I think, for me to think on it. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that whole like self apostasy concept is really interesting. Of the aspect of it is there, but yet it is so repugnant, like you said, to that it just wouldn't be a committed reality, I guess, a committed action in that regard. So that makes sense.
Well, it's like, and I want to be very careful when I say this. I'm not saying that like I'm perfect or don't have sin. Like you know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm like perfect, but I'm saying that there are certain things which would be so repugnant to who I've become that it feels really like impossible for me to do, even though I believe I theoretically have the free will. But to like remove myself, I think of people like my mom, for example, my mom's basically, I believe she's a saint. I really believe that it's more likely, I mean, I can't use a silly enough example. It's more likely that I'm just going to turn into a mouse right now than it is that my mom is going to like call me on the phone and say bad language to me. Like, it's just not like, it's not really possible, but it is theoretically possible. And if anybody can relate that type of relationship where you're like, okay, this person, I know them so well, and I know this about myself. This literally is impossible for me to do because it would go against everything who I am, right? I would literally cease to be myself. And this is where mortal and venial sin even come in from the Roman Catholic paradigm. I actually think it fits beautifully with this. Mortal sin, in a sense, would be doing something like that. So you could still be forgiven, but it's of a much more grave matter than something that's venial, where it's like, like, okay, yes, I know I should be calmer with my kids and not yell at them, but sometimes, you know what I mean, I get worked up and I yell at them more than I should. That doesn't equal apostasy. So I don't want people to hear me wrong or something. Do you know what I mean? But
Right.
like, if I started like swearing at my kids and telling them I hate them or something, that would be a whole nother level that I would just never do. And so it actually plays into kind of something we were talking about before with Josh and the last caller, that it's either like you're oriented towards God or away from God. It's like N.T. Wright talks about this. Like, you're either it's not that like every time somebody does you wrong that you have to make like a willful choice, like, okay, now I'm going to forgive this person. So it's like arbitrary, right? Like, well, I'll forgive this, but I won't forgive this. Like, I don't really think that's really how it at the core level like is meant to work when we think into the mind of God. It's really like you're either a forgiving person or you're not. And so like for me, for example, I've like predetermined, like there's nothing somebody could do to me that I would not forgive them for. The most heinous thing I could think of, I would still, obviously wouldn't be okay with it, but I would still forgive them in the biblically mandated way. And so it's kind of like we're either people that are oriented one way or the other. And I think that concept kind of overrides all theology. So I just want to be careful I say that, because I don't want people to mishear me, because sometimes I say that and I wonder if people think that like I'm saying if they use bad language that they're not a Christian or something, or if I used this earlier, like if they're a Methodist, do you know what I mean? Are they ipso facto like rejecting everything? I don't think that way. I just know that if I did that in a certain setting, in a certain way, it would be so repugnant to who I am that I theoretically have the free will to do it, but I just know it would never happen. And I believe that we can actually know that we can come to know that about ourselves to a large degree. And I also think that we can come to know that to a certain degree about other people. And I realize people might be leery of that because of all the failings of church leaders. That's very complicated. I would have to, that gets into deep psychological things and how well do we really know other people. But I really believe, as an optimist, again, I can use examples, like I could use my wife as an example too. I just know certain things my wife would never do, and I know her well enough. And that's part of the beauty of hopefully having a good things in marriage, is having that kind of trust with people and relationships. But anyways, I hope that helps, bro. Those are just some of my like overarching thoughts.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. That's super helpful. I appreciate your time, breaking that down for me. I know you've probably been streaming for a long time. I'm not sure if there's anyone else behind me as well looking to come on.
No, I don't have anybody else lined up. I was just going to get to a couple of these comments.
Yeah, for sure.
Earlier, but sorry, man. I have this habit. I could just talk forever, bro. So don't let me talk your ear off too longer than I have.
No, I appreciate it. I'm the long-winded person of my family. So like, ask me like a simple question, I give them like 5 paragraphs. So I totally get it.
Well, that's real. That's how you get real answers, man.
Yeah.
Soundbite real answers are hard to come by.
Yeah, it is, man. I just had one more question, man. I just was curious on your perspective, and I'll get out of your hair.
No, you're not in my hair at all, man.
So on part of like the inquiring aspect of like, so near in my local area, right, there's is a cool church. I've kind of had a chance to interact with some of the the priest and some of the dudes there, and they are it's an Anglican church, but they're more evangelical, right? I would say like they're kind of like that. I guess the labels would be like low church. They're very evangelical expression of the tradition.
Is it an ACNA church?
No, it's actually a MIA. Have you heard of them?
Okay. Yep. Anglican
so
Mission in America.
yeah. I don't know.
I think it's
know
Church
too
of
much about it.
Nigeria. I'm right. I think it was originally associated with the Church of Nigeria, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I don't know too much about their history, but anyways, like it's totally really cool. A couple of folks we met. It seems like they're really very nice congregation and stuff like that. And my wife really kind of digs it, right? Because again, we have a very like non-denom background, and so any structured liturgy is kind of like, oh, this is kind of weird, like it's a big change of pace. So I was curious on like how you might approach this of like I feel like it's a really good church to transition into for my family, because it's not like going straight like Anglo-Catholic, but it's also very very inviting, and like my tendency feels like a very like a more high church things. I've reading like Newman and Forbes and Pusey, and like reading these dudes who are I guess more or less like Oxford movement associated, and like my sacramentology like feels like more high church, but then like the preaching the gospel I appreciate, which is very evangelical still, right? And so some like John Stott or like F.S. Bruce or something like that, or like the very evangelical kind of low church expression. How I feel like my sacramentology is too high for the church, but my love for the gospel preaching is just right. But then there's weird in between. Yeah, I think there's like the weird in between of like I want the high church, but I also appreciate the low church aspect. Like, and just trying to struggle. Like, am I too high on one end and maybe just right on the other? And like how to work through that. You know what I mean?
Very
like really appreciate
you,
that.
by the way. So
Yeah.
I have to ask a quick question. Are you possibly in Florida, man? I know of an EMEA church in Florida.
No, I'm in Texas.
Oh, you're in Texas. Okay, right on. That's fascinating, man. I went to a seminary with a guy who was associated with EMEA in Florida. Dude, so first off, I'm laughing, bro, because I totally get that. On YouTube, I come across as like the Anglo-papalist, Anglo-Catholic to the max guy. What's so funny is I'm actually like deeply evangelical in so many ways, and really I'd love to go to a church that has more barbecues and volleyball games, and you know what I mean. Like, so I totally get that grind, man. Like I'll go to a high Corpus Christi mass, but then I'll also like want to just go hang out and listen to Christian rap. So it's pretty funny. People can laugh at me. I think it's great, but I actually do both of those. Yeah, I totally get that, man. Here's what I would say. I do believe I'll share where I'm at, bro. And then my encouragement to anybody is to go where God is leading you in conscience with these things. And they are complicated, and I'd have to know more about like the options on the table in your area. And like, again, like where are you really feeling prompted in your conscience to go? And honestly, all the people who encouraged me when I was wrestling with these questions back in the day, I still wrestle with them, but even more so is, I wanted like cut and dry answers from them, and they would always like never give me clear answers. And looking back on it, I actually like have major respect for that. So I want to kind of emulate them. I have come to believe, when you talked about earlier, you mentioned, I don't remember who you were quoting, but that that worship is actually like the center of reality. I think you were even talking about William Temple, but like that worship is the center of reality. And what I have come to believe is that the proper mass is really the most important reality that we can participate in when it comes to like our Sunday worship. Because what the mass ultimately is it's heaven on earth. and it's the way that we participate in the future now. Want to see come true in the church with all the problems we've been talking about, every hope we have for that, we actually participate that in a promise that we receive right now through the Mass, which is one. There's not two Masses, there's not 547, there's not a million, there's only ever one Mass, right? And so participating in a proper liturgy, in my mind, is like the highest value. And what that would mean is it's a place where the liturgy is done right. So that there's really truly liturgy of the word and there's liturgy of the Eucharist. So I could not encourage past that, like away from that, for any other reasons. However, I also understand both sides of that coin. So I don't know if you know this, brother, but in the morning time, I go to a conservative kind of old high church, Episcopal church, very conservative, very Orthodox, very solid, but it's also very high church. It's not actually technically Anglo-Catholic, but it is fairly Catholic. It's very Catholic in that, like, there's a tabernacle in the church, and just the way the liturgy is done is very Catholic, these kinds of things. They refer to it as the Mass, right? It's just it's properly done. It's a proper Mass. And I get so many things from that are really important to my growth. But then at nighttime, I also go to an ACNA parish where I feel a little bit more comfortable with where the diocese, a lot more comfortable with where the diocese is. I have a very strong relationship. This is in the ACNA, very strong relationship with the priest. However, the service itself is like way lower church. Like, most people would see it and go, that's an extremely evangelical church. And they'd be shocked that I go there. Because I just am such a high church person. The priest is very high church, but he's kind of made the discernment the group of people he's trying to reach is going to be largely like non-denominational people or people from lower church backgrounds coming into Anglicanism. And so, it's just got lower church practices, but the theology is still high church. And so I've come to a place where I can be at peace with that. Even though, certain things, like, I would, like, if you were to just ask me, like, well, what do I think about this and this and this and this, I might have a whole long list of things I would do differently. But so I've come to peace with that in my own life, where I'm like, okay, I have this here, midweek, and for like high feast days, I go to a strictly Anglo-Catholic Episcopal church that's very conservative. And so I kind of do the best I can with where I am. And so, but I get that pull. I guess I would just say, for starters, you do want to go to a place where you can receive weekly Eucharist and participate in a valid Mass. It's best, obviously, to find a place if you can find that mixed with great homilies and preaching and grasp of the word. But you have to kind of look at your best option. But I think it's looking for the best option within validity, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I think you have to believe it's valid. Otherwise, that would be a violation of conscience. But then within what's valid, you have to discern between different things, right? So, like, yeah. There's all sorts of things that I, in some sense, miss from when I was growing up. Like, I won't go too in depth, but like, for one, just one quick example. People don't even know this, but probably my greatest gift from God, outside of, like, I think teaching is a gift God's given me, that I hope I do somewhat well. But other than that, I played college sports, but a greater gift I think I have than that is singing like real classical music, like real hymnody, and choral sacred music. And it was really hard for me. I've spent a lot of time in the ACNA where that's just not something that's lived out very much,
Yeah.
I do get that at the Episcopal church I go to now, which is wonderful. Now, obviously, that's not the same as, but we always have to, in every situation, we have to make those kind of questions. We have to answer those kind of questions and wrestle with hard questions. So, I guess just one last thing I would say to you, brother. I want to be really careful how I say this. I do believe that groups like the AMIA participate in an eschatological reality. So again, the Mass is one. So I would say they participate there. However, I would say that reflection upon jurisdictional questions is also really important. So, like, for me, if I'm speaking to my personal self, I think I would wrestle going to a church that felt more niche-y and in like a smaller communion, whereas like ACNA, with all its problems, is still in the larger global South world, in the larger GAFCON world. Conservative Episcopal churches are still within the larger Anglican communion, right? And even the continuum is still, in a sense, in a larger reality. I guess to me, those kind of questions are also important. So like reflect on, but it also depends on like what options you are. I know Texas is a very big state, that area. So you know what I mean? It can be very complicated based off where you are. But I guess I would just also say it's important to wrestle with not just the theology, but also where is that church grounded in the larger Christian world, and what communion do they have with others, as something to reflect on.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you sharing too, like kind of the violation of conscience. It just kind of shot back to my memory, reading I always butcher his name. I think it's Father Dom Gregory Dix, and he has his letters to a layman. I forget the full name of the book, but it's only like 90 pages. It's like his letters to a layman who was considering leaving, the Anglican Church and going to Rome because of I think it was probably based on the validity of holy orders and all that whole scandal. But there's a portion that I remember that what you said about violation of conscience. I think he kind of says it pretty bluntly to the parishioners, like, "Hey, man, you've examined the claims from Rome. I've given you my spiel. You have both sides. You need to make a choice. You can't just sit in my pew and be basically wishy-washy. Like, you have to make a choice, that otherwise even indecision is a decision, which would be a violation of conscience if you're convicted on one way or the other. If you're convicted for Rome, go to Rome. If you're convicted for here, stay here. But either way, follow what the Lord has lead you to not violate your conscience," is basically what he told him. But don't sit in my pew like freaking out and have anxiety because you can't decide. I thought it was really interesting, like, advice from someone who, again, like, is pouring himself out to parishioners day in, day out, and I guess even having the humility to say, "Hey, man, if you're convicted and conscious to go into the papacy, go. Like, I won't stop you." Right? Like, it was really interesting to kind of hear that perspective of like, don't violate your conscience, but follow what the Lord is leading you. So I appreciate you sharing that.
I think, yeah, bro, just real quick, and I'll try to wrap it up just real quick from my end here. And then please feel free to share any final reflections, bro. Just real quick. So these are the questions. I think when I was younger, I didn't understand conscience as much. Conscience is a really important topic or concept in the Christian life. Just real quick, I guess I would say, I know I get pushback from Anglicans about this, but in my mind, part of the reason I'm Anglican is because I deeply want to say yes to everybody to the highest degree that I can. And so I would say there is a place where you can be principled without having to say necessarily no. And that maybe that's just me, but like, part of what I'd say the number one reason what keeps me Anglican, and this is not meant to draw anybody away from another apostolic body. I just believe that all of these traditions, even with the places they may need to reflect and reconsider some things, I just really believe that these various apostolic bodies, Rome, Eastern Orthodoxy, Anglicanism, Apostolic Lutheranism, like Succession Lutheranism, I just believe that they all participate in the church just on like a very, very deep level. And so I want to say yes to them. And so our sacramental view of the church really says that already on an ontological, eschatological level. And I think in some ways they say that in a lot of ways back in various ways. But I do think that we have to use C.S. Lewis's analogy, we have to choose a room. You can't sit in the hallway forever. You have to choose a room. One thing about the room that I've chosen is that I'm trying to have the widest angle lens that I can have. I think I'll just end really quickly with these two analogies. One of them is like, if you're taking a picture, my wife's a wedding photographer. If you take a picture in the dark, the reason it takes longer to take the picture is because what you're trying to do is suck in as much light as possible, right? To take like a clear picture. My view of Anglicanism is not like we're right and everybody else is off. It's kind of like I'm trying to just have a wide angle lens that it sucks in as much light as possible to take a clear picture. And so it's kind of like Anglicans are just trying to believe that which is true. And then the second image I would give comes from the great movie, if nobody's ever seen it, Joseph King of Dreams, the DreamWorks movie. I don't know if you've seen that, bro.
Oh yeah, dude.
But the scene where he's in prison, which by the way is a type for the incarnation. He goes from a high place to a low place to a high place to sit at the right hand of. When he's at his lowest place and he sings "You Know Better Than I," the final line to that song is, He says, I saw a cloud and thought it was the sky. I saw a bird and thought that I could follow. And then he says, but it was you who taught that bird to fly. If I let you reach me, will you teach me? For you know better than I. I am constantly have that on my mind, this notion of, I feel like so much of us, myself included sometimes, we see all of reality as Christians. Like sometimes I wonder if we're looking at the cloud sky rather than the whole sky. And I think part of the vision that I would have for Christianity is drawing back the camera angle from the cloud so we can see the larger sky. And then when he says, and I saw a bird and thought that I could follow it, oftentimes we like see one line of logic and think like, okay, this is the way, this is the way. But then you realize that like there's all sorts of birds that fly around. Now, what's fascinating is usually those birds all migrate to the same areas, like in Central America, right? Somehow they know instinctively where to go. But God is teaching all these birds to fly. And again, it doesn't solve everything, but to me, it gives like conceptual concept of just like how I try to view Christendom, where it's like, I've chosen a room, I've made a decision, but I still think that decision inherently is trying to include the other rooms in our room in a sense, through the wide angle lens or through the breadth of the sky and the bird analogy. Anyways, I just think those are the kind of things that really speak to me. I'll give it as a final interesting reflection, bro. But I want you to have the final word, brother. I know I've held you for a long time tonight, but I found this wonderful, by the way. I hope you found this edifying.
No, yeah, I super appreciate, man, your time, and it has been super edifying, and as my wife likes to say, my cup is full, right? And it's a good conversation. I appreciate it. I think like you said, like we're just trying to figure out, I think how to be obedient to the Lord's leading and to set my pride aside to say, you know, your will be done, Lord. I think that's like the biggest thing, like, especially being a father, right? I've now like trying to say like, hey, I can't expect you to obey if I'm not showing you what obedience is. And like, it's just a good reminder of like having little mini me's running around is like such a good reminder of like, oh my goodness, like this is so many more passages in scripture and stories in scripture are relatable because I have kids.
Bro, I'm gonna be real with you, man. This is not a knock. I don't think that married life is higher than the single life. I don't think that at all, actually.
Right.
And so this is not a knock on people who are not parents, who don't have kids, or who have, you know, God's brought them to a different place in life. I will say though, it is so fascinating the difference between talking with people who are parents and who are not parents. There's some people who are not parents who still really get it. But it is like it opened your eyes to so many things, bro. I love talking to other parents, especially parents with a bunch of kiddos. It's like it really is. You can relate on such a different level. All 5 of my kids, by the way, are like super off the rails. So like I can talk all the theology I want here, but what's so funny is like my general like reflection on Sunday morning is just like there's just like chaos going on all around me, like 24/7. Like I can't even describe it. It's so funny, man. But it definitely opens your minds up to theological reflection.
yes, it does, man.
That's your life, man.
Well, I appreciate you. I definitely appreciate your channel and your content, man. It's been super helpful to kind of like work through questions and just gain information on insight. So I definitely appreciate it, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing the future stuff you might put out, or any more live streams you might have.
Dude. I may make this a regular thing. This is really fun. There's some YouTubers who do this stuff all the time. And if the people like this, I think this is way more fun than me just ranting on for 3 hours. So I love this, man. I hope we get to chat again, brother. It's been such a blessing, dude. If you don't mind, I for you, brother, and for anybody else listening, I want to read. I've read this before, but it's so apropos, and sometimes it hits different in different moments. If I could, I wanted to just close this part, and then I do want to answer a couple things in the comment section before I log off, guys. I'm sure those people are probably long gone, but I'll answer them anyways, just real quick. I wanted to read though the words to this hymn, brother. This is a Charles Wesley hymn, so it's a great Anglican hymn. This hymn was said at the conclusion to a sermon that was given actually at Truett at Baylor. I don't know how close you are to Baylor.
Oh, nice.
What'd you say, brother?
I said, yeah, I'm a few hours from that, but okay. I know the area.
But you know the area. So I struck up a friendship with he's probably the top Methodist scholar on the planet at the time. His name is William J. Abraham. He used to teach at Southern Methodist University. And he's Northern Irish. He's like amazing. But anyways, he was actually brought in to be the Wesley Studies Chair at Truett a few years back. And made sure I struck up a friendship with him. Not like, I didn't know him super well, but a little bit of one. And he actually loosely invited me to his doctoral program. And shortly after this, he died. God rest his soul. At Truett, and if you're ever interested in this man or anybody, this is literally my favorite sermon that I've ever heard. He preached at the Truett Chapel, and he shortly before he died, and he was preaching. The text for that day was from 2 Timothy, and 2 Timothy is really probably Paul's last letter that he ever wrote. And so really what 2 Timothy sort of is it's the marching orders from a man who knows that he's going to die to basically his protege, like the one who he's trying to raise up in the faith as a next leader in the faith. And so 2 Timothy is very consequential because he's giving it as he's going to die. And in this sermon, that's what Billy Abraham talks about. And he talks about his interactions with his son, who he actually lost his son in a very tragic way. And anyways, he goes into some of these things. And what's so fascinating is he ends by quoting this. His closing prayer is this hymn I want to read for you, brother. And I've always felt like, in a sense, this was his final word to me before he died. Somebody who I really consider a friend. So this is like very personal to me. But I wanted to read this because I just think it's so poignant, apropos, and beautiful beyond words. But so this is the hymn. It's titled "Lord, That I May Learn of Thee." And it's from Charles Wesley. These are the first stanzas. Lord, that I may learn of thee, give me true simplicity. Wean my soul and keep it low, willing thee alone to know. Let me cast my reeds aside, all that feeds my knowing pride. Not to man, but God submit. Lay my reasonings at thy feet. Of my boasted wisdom spoiled, docile, helpless as a child, only seeing in thy light, only walking in thy might. Then infuse the teaching grace, spirit of truth and righteousness, knowledge, love divine impart, life eternal to my heart. And I just have to say amen to that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
There's not much more I can say, but for those who want to look into that more deeply, this is really a point of meditation and prayer. Lord, that I may learn of thee by Charles Wesley. So, well, brother, appreciate you, man. Thanks for hanging on. You're a legend, bro. I really hope we get a chance to talk again soon. So this has been a real pleasure to do this, brother. So
thanks, man. It's been a pleasure as well. God bless you.
God bless you, man. Have a good night, brother.
Peace.
Peace out, man. All right, it's cool. Well, I'm just I know this is a super late night stream, bro. I'm not quite gonna beat my boy Zach, the Anglican acolyte, for his 1,000 subs, had a 4+ hour stream. I don't think I'm gonna beat that. But I said I was gonna hit this comment. I was gonna talk about this comment that I got like way back at the beginning. I just wanted to do that real quick. I'm sure this person's probably gone, but that's okay. They asked, what would you recommend to somebody trying to figure out what Anglicanism to follow? Every school of thought within Anglicanism can look to the formularies and affirm their position. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a larger epistemological question. Everybody can claim to the core of Anglicanism. I do think, though, there is, with everything I've said, I think that different truths can come from different places. I do still think there's a coherent vision. And I do think that a book like The Anglican Spirit really deals well with this, where it looks at how different periods of Anglican history have kind of come together to form a particular way of thinking in the 20th century and then into the 21st century. So I would say that Anglicanism has to be based in the larger Catholic world. So we cannot be an island on our own with our own Reformed theology or something. Anglicanism has to be a part of the Church Catholic. So we are indebted to the wider breadth of the Church Catholic. We're indebted to the Vincentian canon. We're indebted to the councils of the Church and to the consensual teaching of the Church. And then I would say we're indebted to where God is bringing about convergence in the modern world, because I think all Christians are called to reflect on where the Holy Spirit is bringing us. Now, what exactly that looks like is something I try to talk about in my many, many videos on this channel. It's too big of a question for now, but I don't think it's as simple as just saying, like we say the formularies or whatever, but the formularies have to be interpreted. The formularies are always subservient to the greater witness of the Church Catholic and the greater Vincentian canon. So obviously, any question we say begs another question. So I would say ultimately it's going to be the breadth. And people might say that's too complicated. We want it more simple. I would just say human life is complicated. It's like if you're in a marriage is just complicated. There's no like simple method to marriage. Marriage is extremely complicated. Human relationships are extremely complicated. So if you want the answer for Anglicanism, it is going to be a complex, very nuanced, very carefully articulated answer. And I would say healthy marriages that I know are able to wrestle through nuances of relationships. Healthy friendships are able to do that as well. Healthy parental relationships as well. This is also true with Anglicanism. Human life's just complicated. So I would say it starts out with a broad narrative of the gospel and the story. Anglicanism is always based on the story. You can see this in like N.T. Wright, C.S. Lewis. They're people of the story. And then within that story, there's one Catholic Church. I would say that one Catholic Church has consensus around many, many things that we are bound to as Anglicans. There are distinctives of English spirituality and certain emphases that we want to draw out and that we have historically at times. I think sometimes those things which we've taken a stand on at times have actually drawn our other brethren from different places closer to our position. So I would say there's this point of convergence. And at other times, we've needed to reconsider some of our things and learn from brethren in other traditions. And I think all of those things can happen without having to forsake our past or our history or the core things. So I think there's a way to draw in our formularies into that. Again, they're still subservient to the larger whole of the Vincentian canon and of Catholic truth and of Catholic discernment across the breadth of the church. And those things ultimately need to find themselves within the larger story of God and of the gospel. And so I know that sounds, so in my mind, this is where Anglicans are different from some other ecclesial traditions. I would say we start with the meta narrative and then all the particulars we work out over time. So there are, like, if somebody wants to ask specifically about like the 39 articles are an icon into they're a window into a larger whole. But I don't start with the little building block. It's kind of the difference between those who start with like building blocks of life and then try to build up like a whole line of truth from building blocks. I think that greater truth lies in finding the meta narrative and then trying to make sense of the meta narrative with the particulars. But I think the whole of the scriptures and the whole of the Catholic faith give the meta narrative. And as complicated and as nuanced as you have to be as an Anglican, it can also open you up to deep truth. So I guess the last thing I would say here is this analogy I always give of the XY graph. If you are in a relationship with a person, if you're worried about getting hurt, you only put in a little bit of effort. And it's philosophically necessitated that the amount of effort you give, like if you only want to get a little bit hurt, you only put in a little bit of effort, because if I put in too much effort into this relationship, it philosophically necessitates that I could get even more hurt, right? We just know this about our relationships, right? It's like, okay, if I'm really vulnerable with this girl, right? If I'm really vulnerable, I could get really hurt. Or if I'm really vulnerable with this friend, I could get really hurt. So if I want to keep my circle tight, I'm just a little vulnerable because then I'll only get a little bit hurt. Anglicanism, reflecting, I think, what God does in creation, opens itself up to deep, deep, deep truth, which can mean either deep, deep, deep reality being reflected, or it can mean chaos and disaster. So in order to reach deep, deep, deep truth, we have to be willing to work through the nuance and the complexities of Christendom and of church history and Christian life. So I guess I would just say that it's never not going to be a simple answer, but it is a thing. If we open ourselves, then we can get really hurt, but it also opens us up to really deep truth. And I think that the whole breadth of the Catholic Church, Anglicanism, as well as our brethren in our other fully Catholic traditions, we all are called to continue to open ourselves up. And from that, may God bring forth his truth and his will. So, all right, guys, cool. Well, I think that's about all the questions I was going to hit. If anybody, I guess I'll stay on 2 more minutes. If I missed anything that anybody really wanted me to touch on, go ahead and drop it in the chat now, in like the newer parts of the chat. But I really appreciate you all. Yeah, and thank you guys. I guess I'll just quick touch on this, brother. I don't know if you're still here. Appreciate you, man, and thanks for your time and your engagement that you do on this channel. Yeah, I definitely know that all traditions would claim this. I guess that's a general Anglican quip where it's like, N.T. Wright will say this: Anglicans don't have any truth of their own, or any they don't have any doctrine of their own. It's just that if something is true, Anglicans happen to believe it. Obviously, that can be misplayed, but it's trying to get in an English wit sort of sense at like that. We seek for deep truth. That means learning from the other. Now, of course, our Roman Catholic brethren can do that, and Eastern Orthodox and other people as well. I just mean that's a generic Anglican way of kind of trying to think about things. But again, appreciate you being here and for your engagement, brother. God's peace to you. Yeah. So guys, I know this has been a long stream. Hopefully it's been edifying. I'll do more. If you guys like these, I mean, don't feel obligated, but if somebody lets me know, and especially in the leftover comments afterwards, for one, that can help drive engagement. But two, if you guys like these kind of call-ins, I can definitely keep doing these on a fairly regular basis. I think they're really cool, and I'd rather do these than just talk to myself. I will give a plug tomorrow. Oh, what's up, man? Sorry that I missed you. No worries, man. I know I'm just wrapping up here. I'll do another one of these though soon, bro, and hopefully you can hop in. Appreciate you, man. Just to give a plug, tomorrow, I believe it'll be tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a dialogue with T.D. Barrett on the liturgy, and we're going to be talking about the post-Vatican II liturgical reforms, and we're going to be doing a lot of deep dive there. So I think that'll be a pre-recorded video that'll come out, but be on the lookout for that. I'll probably do another live stream fairly soon. I have something coming up with Bishop Chandler Jones. I just confirmed I'm doing something with the layman apologist, my friend from Ireland, in September, on September 10th. And I hope to have some other stuff coming up soon as well. But yeah. All right, guys. Well, God's peace to y'all. I'll go ahead and read a closing comment or collect, and then we'll bounce from here. This has been fun. We might hit the 4-hour mark. Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, cool. Let me go ahead here. I'll find it in the actual prayer book here. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us, guys. I know it's super late. I can't believe we still have this many people in the chat, but it's great. I appreciate you guys being here, and I pray this has been edifying. I just want to say the people who came on the call today, this has been phenomenal. Like, it definitely encourages me, and the depth with which people are engaging with the church and ecclesiology and seeking the will of God. So, all right, cool. So I'll go ahead and pray this closing prayer. For the answering of prayer, the Lord be with you, and with your spirit. Let us pray. Almighty God, who has promised to hear the petitions of those who ask in thy Son's name, we beseech thee mercifully to incline thine ear to us, who have now made our prayers and supplications unto thee, and grant that those things which we have faithfully asked, according to thy will, may effectually be obtained to the relief of our necessity and to the setting forth of thy glory. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. God's peace to y'all. Appreciate you guys being here, and I hope you guys have a blessed night. I'm going to hang on another 20 seconds, 22 seconds, and then it'll hit the 4-hour mark, which is pretty cool. But guys, I hope you have a blessed night. I hope this was fun. Yeah, and again, a huge shout out to everybody who came on. If I didn't get to anybody, please forgive me. I'll be doing one of these another time soon. But hopefully these are edifying and cool. If you haven't already, do consider subscribing, liking can help this video. If you want to, you can leave a comment in the normal comment section. Yeah, and that'll be cool. So, all right, guys, God's peace to y'all. Hope you guys have a blessed night, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. God's peace, y'all.